Chapter 10:20. Even if she wrote it to Rui, can't I read it? Li Yi took the envelope from his hand and said, "What is my relationship with Mingzu and Rui? The three of us are like one person. Is it wrong for me to read the letter I wrote to myself?" Fong looked at him and said seriously, "Young master, I advise you not to read it." Li Yi tore the envelope in front of him and took out the letter. Fong looked at him and did not say anything. He just patted him on the shoulder, sighed, and turned to leave. "You're getting more and more insensible." Li Yi glanced at him. He took Mingzhu's letter and planned to go back to his room to read it. However, he did not go back. He stood there for a long time and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He opened the letter and handed it to Mississippi Lu and said, "This is a letter from Mingzhu to you." "I opened it for you." Fong was insensible. He did not know Rui when he saw her, so he opened the letter and handed it to her. After Li Yi handed the letter to Mississippi Lu, he asked thoughtfully, "Do you want me to read it for you?" Mississippi Lu said indifferently, "Read it if you want." "That's embarrassing." Li Yi looked at the letter in her hand. Mississippi Lu turned and went back into the house. Li Yi looked at her back and sighed and shook his head. Saying one thing and going back on one's words, "Oh, women," Li Yi leaned against the pillar and was puzzled. Mingzhu did not reply to him. What kind of letter did she write to Rui? Changde and old Taoist Yuan were both gurus, and they were close to each other. In terms of distance and strength, there was no reason for them to ask Mississippi Lu for guidance. It could be said that they were confiding in each other's bosom friends, but they were not bosom friends. They would fight whenever they saw each other. It was impossible for them to chat about their daily lives. Mingzhu would never compare who was older with Mississippi Lu in the letter. That would be asking for humiliation. What did they have to say in the letter? Li Yi really couldn't understand. No matter how he thought about it, it was all Fong's fault. In the past, he was such a simple, kind, and qualified wingman. Ever since he got together with Little Red, he had completely changed. Mingzhu had written a letter to Rui, but she hadn't told him in advance. What if they... What would he do? There was no way he could explain this to Rui, let alone the old emperor. Soon, Rui came out of the room. Li Yi pretended to ask casually, "What did she say in the letter?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said lightly, "The letter is on the table in the room. If you want to read it, go and read it yourself." "I don't want to read it." Li Yi shook his head and walked into her room. He said, "The letter you borrowed from me last time. Bah, it's time to return the book you borrowed from me." "I'll go and get it myself." The letter was indeed on her desk. When Li Yi walked over, he glanced at it. There were only 2 lines of words. It didn't look like a letter at all. He took a book from the bookshelf. When he walked over, he stopped and finally saw the 2 lines clearly. "He teased me." That was the first line. "Help me beat him up, I'll help you next time." This was the second line. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu, who was standing at the door, and curled his lips. It was fine if she didn't want him to read it, but why did she have to take out a fake letter? She must have written it herself. Mingzhu was the princess of a country, and there was no distinction between them. How could she say something like that? What's more, he wrote this letter just to get Rui to beat him up. What's this, Didi call? A clumsy self-directed performance. This Rui was getting more and more out of hand. Women. Then he saw the woman begin to close the door. Li Yi's expression changed, and he immediately said, "You don't really believe what she said, do you?" Mississippi Lu didn't say anything and walked straight towards him. Li Yi retreated to the bedside and said, "We are a family. Mingzhu is still an outsider for the time being. Are you sure you want to listen to her one-sided words?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, "You just said that the 3 of us are like one person, and I beat myself up. Is that wrong?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, I was wrong. You used a wrong conclusion, and you can only come up with an even more wrong conclusion. I am not you, so beating me up is not the same as beating yourself up. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, then what is the correct conclusion? You are you, the unique you. And Mingzu and I are like one person. If she wants to beat me up, I have nothing to say. Mississippi Lu thought for a moment, looked at him and said, you and Mingzu are like one person, and Li Mingzu and I are also like one person, so you and I are also like one person. Li Yi's eyes widened, how can you two be like one person? Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, I have taken a bath with her. Have you? I have even slept with her. Have you? Li Yi looked at her and said disdainfully. Li Yi remembered that once in the morning dew hall, the two of them were discussing national affairs, and then Mingzu was so sleepy that she fell asleep on his shoulder. He was never afraid of who was closer to Mingzu. She had seen Mingzu take a bath, and he had seen her take a bath. Mississippi Lu was stunned, then looked at him and murmured, you have slept together. When Li Yi walked out of Mississippi Lu's room, Fong was squatting in the yard, watching him walk out. Hitting is a sign of affection and scolding is love. Fong looked at him and said, the harder you hit, the deeper the love. You should be content, son-in-law. You should know that second miss never treats others like that. Fong was not only ignorant and incompetent, but also shamelessly plagiarized. The shameless Fong looked at Li Yi and said, son-in-law, sit. I'm not sitting. Li Yi shook his head and said, I've been sitting in Rui's room for too long. Fong looked at him and didn't expose him. He thought for a moment and asked, son-in-law, it will be New Year in 2 days, and the 15th is coming soon. Should we prepare? A few days earlier. Don't ruin the Lantern Festival. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, the 11th day of the first month is a good day. Tell them to attack on the 11th. Fong thought for a moment and asked, then should we tell Chin Chong to mobilize some troops from other places? Li Yi shook his head and said, no need. The garrison of Yong County is the same as before. They won't be needed this time. It had to be said that the holy religion couldn't be underestimated. Their followers were all hidden in the dark. Other than those people, there were even more hidden spies. From the information obtained so far, they should have already infiltrated the defense of Yong County. If they mobilized the garrison of Shuzhou, they definitely wouldn't be able to cover up all the movements and would definitely alert the enemy. When the king of Shu escaped, it would be difficult to catch him again. All right, I'll arrange it right away. Fong responded and turned to leave. After Fong left, Li Yi rubbed his buttocks and an extremely depressed expression appeared on his face. Mingzu and Rui were actually in cahoots, writing a letter to Rui from thousands of miles away just to beat him up. More importantly, Rui actually believed her one-sided words and sided with her. Beating them up was a sign of affection and scolding them was a sign of love. Sooner or later, he would settle the scores with those two women and let them know how much he loved them. A love that couldn't be expressed in words. Chapter 1021. As the new year approached, the people of Yong County finally knew what was going on with the newly built shopping mall at the West Gate. Shops, they were all shops. They were too much for one's eyes to take in, and they lingered on for a long time. There were restaurants, brothels, inns, cloth stores, clothing stores, music stores, jewelry stores. There was even a market that occupied 5 shops. From now on, they didn't need to travel all over the county just to buy a few things. In this small shopping mall, there was nothing they couldn't think of. In the past, the people living near the West Gate were the poorest people in Yong County. In the past few months, the situation had changed dramatically. Businessmen from all over could no longer rent shops in the shopping mall. Yong County temporarily prohibited foreign businessmen from buying and selling land, so they could only pay high rents to the surrounding people and rent their houses as shops. They immediately became the wealthiest group of people in the county. These people weren't the only ones whose lives had changed. The textile workshops had also provided many ways for the idle women at home to earn money. They could choose to weave at home and sell to the textile workshop, or they could work in the textile workshop for a fixed monthly salary. They could also raise silkworms and sell the silk. The fabrics and clothing of the Jing Kingdom, especially silk, were very popular in all countries. No matter how many goods they produced, they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell them. The tradition of men farming and women weaving didn't change, but the delicate women used their skillful hands to support half of the sky at home. Later research showed that in Yong County, the famous hometown of silk in the Jing Kingdom, the tradition of men living off women and being afraid of their wives originated from this. Although the standard of living had improved, the spending power of the people in Yong County was limited. They still had to rely on these businessmen from all over the country. Even though they had to pay taxes to the local government and the rent for the shops in the shopping mall wasn't cheap, it was still much better than taking the risk of traveling all over the mountains and rivers. Just 2 days after the opening, the shopping mall was already crowded with people. After all, it was stupid not to take advantage of a good deal. Many of the shops in Yong County had opening promotions and year-end clearance sales at the same time. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait until next year. 10 coins for all, 10 coins for all. You can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins. The shopkeeper is in a hurry to go home for the new year. He's selling at a loss, selling at a loss. Last 2 days, last 2 days. The shopkeeper ran away with his sister-in-law. We can only use the Rui dew and perfume to pay for our wages. Everything is half price, everything is half price. Whenever a shop advertised like this, there would be an endless stream of customers, causing the surrounding peers to be dumbfounded. 10 copper coins, half price, loss. If everyone did business like this, then all the merchants in this world would have starved to death long ago. These businessmen from the Jing Kingdom really had no bottom line. Was silver so important that he was willing to throw away his face for it? However, when they looked at the crowded shop and the few people in their shop, the expressions on the others' faces became complicated. Finally, a few of them whispered a few words into the ears of their shop assistants. The assistants hesitated for a moment before walking out of the shop. New store opening, second item half price. Buy 3 get 1 free, buy 5 get 2 free, buy 10 get 5 free. Opening discount. 10 coins will be deducted for every 100 coins. 50 coins will be deducted for every 300 coins. The crowd split into several groups and rushed towards the shops. Amidst the crowd, a man in blue walked out of the shopping mall. He looked back for a long time before turning around and exiting the city gate from another direction. Opposite the shopping mall, on the second floor of a tea house, another man in blue withdrew his gaze and stood up. He respectfully said to the young man opposite him, "Lord Su, this man is Xing Bang, a blue-clothed messenger of the church. He works under the right emissary." In the land of Bedlam, a man in blue looked at Fang Yu and said, "Guardian, it has been confirmed. That place has indeed been turned into a market. I've seen it with my own eyes. The shops there are doing very well. If we attack from the west gate, we can first rob them of all their goods and money. It's very convenient." Fang Yu lowered his head and thought for a moment. He asked, "Is there any movement in the defense of Yong County?" The man in blue thought for a moment and said, "Nothing out of the ordinary. I've already contacted our spy. He said that there are no signs of movement in the defense of Yong County. If there is any news, he will inform us immediately." Fang Yu nodded and said, "On the 14th of the first month." "That's not appropriate." The king of Shu strode in from outside and said, "Baldy's men are here. They suggest that we attack a few days earlier, on the 11th of the first month. The 15th of the first month is the Lantern Festival. 3 days before that, the defense of the county will definitely be strengthened. It's most suitable to attack on the 11th of the first month. It can minimize the losses. Fang Yu thought for a moment and felt that what the king said made sense. Then, he seemed to think of something and frowned. He said, according to the almanac, it's forbidden to go out on the 11th of the first month. The king of Shu knew that the holy religion was troublesome, but he didn't expect it to be so troublesome. They already had the empress, so why would they still believe in the almanac? He frowned and asked, where is the almanac? Fang Yu pointed to the table. The king of Shu walked over to take a look and picked it up. He smiled and said, this is this year's. In a few days, it'll be next year. This almanac is outdated, it'll be the 11th of the first month. He looked at Fang Yu and said, I'll send someone to inform those baldies. They'll start preparing now and strive to be foolproof. Fang Yu was silent for a moment and nodded. All right. The two discussed for a while more before the king of Shu left in a hurry. He stepped out of the door and looked up at the sky. His lips curled into a smile and he said eerily, Li Yi, Jiang of Silla. We'll meet soon. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Aren't you going to get married soon? I'll give you a big gift before your wedding. Inside the house, Fang Yu looked at the person behind him and said, go get a new almanac. Yes, guardian. The person nodded and immediately went out. Soon, he came back with a new almanac. The 11th of the first month of the year of Ihai, Ikai. This is the heaven's wish for the holy religion to make Ikai. Fang Yu was very satisfied with this and nodded. He looked at the person and said, you may leave first. Yes. The disciple walked out. He still had a little doubt in his heart. The almanac said Ikai, but it didn't say who Ikai was. What if it was Ikai? Somewhere on a mountain in the fringe. Several figures were climbing the mountain path with difficulty. They were panting from exhaustion. I say, why don't we take the main road? Why do we have to climb over the mountains? Don't complain. Although the main road has been repaired by those baldies, it's still better to take shortcuts quickly. If you delay His Highness' business, be careful of your head. Say, do you think that Baldy's place is really as good as they say? A city in the mountains, with restaurants, brothels, and even a school. I don't believe it. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. You'll know when you see it with your own eyes. The group was chatting as they climbed the mountain. When they reached a certain point, the view before them suddenly opened up. A clear path led straight to the top of the mountain. As far as the eye could see, there seemed to be the shadows of buildings hidden in the forest. Just as the group took a few steps forward, several arrows suddenly shot out from the forest and stabbed into the ground in front of them. The person walking at the front couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If those arrows had been a few inches higher, his foot would have been pierced through. Chapter 10:22. The Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger. Just as the few of them were shocked, a cold voice came from the forest. On the mountain path, the leader was stunned. When he regained his senses, he immediately said, I know, the pagoda suppresses the river demon. It's the pagoda suppresses the river demon. We're on the same side, we're on the same side. Muha, Muha. Sawadika. Why are you blushing? Lin Zhong's voice softened as he asked again. That person immediately said, I'm in high spirits. Why is it yellow again? It's a wax to prevent the cold. After a while, a voice came from the forest. Continue forward, there will be someone ahead to receive you. This was considered a code. The few of them were relieved. These baldies were indeed very particular. Before entering the village, they had to memorize so many codes. Moreover, they sounded more powerful, like the slang of bandits, unlike their own prince, who had learned everything from others and insisted on changing the code to, the King of Shu is not a fish in a pond, he will transform into a dragon in the face of a storm. They were too embarrassed to mention it to others. In comparison, although the code of these baldies was complicated and difficult to remember, it was much more shameless than the King of Shoes. Thank you, brother. One of them cupped his hands at Lin Zhong, and the few of them quickly disappeared on the mountain path. Not long after, another figure slowly walked along the mountain path. When he walked under a tree, he stopped and looked into the forest. His lips moved slightly. Beep, beep. He made two sounds, one long and two short sounds. Secret codes like Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger, which had been eliminated by them, were used to distinguish between friend and foe. Their secret codes had long been upgraded and changed every half a month. If an enemy wanted to pretend to be one of their comrades, they would die a horrible death. Beep, beep. He did not stand in place for long. Soon, the same response came from the forest. Another youth with a bow and arrow walked out of the forest. He looked at him and nodded, saying, "They're back. They're back." That person nodded as well. He took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over, saying, "This is the attack plan and route map. Remember to let them bring it when they leave. Send my regards to the king and the Alliance Master." What's the hurry? It's only a few days. You can ask them yourself. I'm leaving, see you later. After a brief exchange, the young man with the bow and arrow on his back once again hid in the forest, while the figure of the other person also slowly disappeared from the mountain path. At the top of the mountain, the few of them stood on the bluestone paved street and looked at the city in front of them. They were dumbstruck and couldn't take another step forward. Neat streets, rows upon rows of shops, and rows upon rows of neat wooden houses looked exactly the same from the outside. Even outside the fringe, it was rare to see such a scene in the big cities of the Jing Kingdom. Compared to the territory of these baldies, the place they lived in was at most a kennel. This was Li Yi's first New Year's Eve in Shuzhou. Although they were far away from the capital, the atmosphere of the new year was even stronger. Perhaps it was because there were fewer social activities, only a simple family. It was just like the pure New Year when he first came here. The only difference was that the people of Shuzhou were too enthusiastic. In just a few days, the Jiang of Silla residents received a few houses full of gifts. Although they weren't valuable, they still represented the people's goodwill. Li Yi also asked the gatekeeper to prepare red envelopes for all the people who came to his residence with gifts. This was considered reciprocity. Shuzhou had already begun to develop rapidly. The lives of the people would get better and better, and their wallets would naturally become more and more full. Although there was still a big gap from the level he had hoped for, some things could not be achieved overnight. It was almost impossible for a state to catch up with the capital without 10 or 20 years of development. All he had to do now was to wait patiently. Fong walked in from outside with an envelope in his hand. After opening it, Li looked at it and said, "So, they have a spy in Yong County who has the ability to secretly open the west gate on the night of the 11th day of the first month?" That's what they said, but they didn't say who it was. Fong nodded and said, "I've already asked Old Chen to investigate. It's very simple. It's the person who was in charge of guarding the west gate that day." Very soon, people from the provincial governor's estate arrived. Li Yi looked at the things that Chen Chong had sent over. The officer who was usually in charge of guarding the west gate had been knocked on the head by someone on his way home after drinking last night and was slightly injured. His duty had been temporarily taken over by one of his subordinates. Li Yi put down the paper and said in a small voice, "Captain, son-in-law, I suddenly have an idea," Fong suddenly said after some thought. Li Yi turned his head to look at him. "What idea?" "I think that ambushing people on the walls to shoot arrows, splash boiling oil, throw stones, this is a bit too troublesome." He looked at Li Yi and thought for a moment. "Son-in-law, what do you think about directly throwing in heavenly punishment?" Li Yi was startled. Isn't this a bit too much? It's not too much. Fong slapped his thigh and said, I think this is a very good idea. It's simple and direct. Throw in a few heavenly punishments, and the people will think that it's New Year's firecrackers. Before daybreak, we can just send the city guards over to clean up the mess. One shouldn't be too Fong. One should always leave a way out in the future. Throwing in a few heavenly punishments would not blow up the king of Shu or the bandits of the holy religion. It would blow up the productivity. Shu province was about to enter a stable stage of development. After things settled down here and the king of Shu and emissary of the right were defeated, they would officially start marching into the land of chaos. At that time, they would be most lacking in manpower. Therefore, these people couldn't be blown up. It's better to prepare archers. Li Yi said after some thought. Fong looked at him and asked, what if they put up a fierce resistance and would rather die than surrender? Li Yi thought for a moment and added, prepare more heavenly punishments as well, just in case. Throughout the year, even the usually quiet and desolate Yong County would become lively and bustling. The liveliness reached a climax during the New Year's Day and then gradually subsided. It was only after the 10th day of the new year that there were signs of recovery. All the people in the city had to prepare for the upcoming Lantern Festival. Today was the 11th day of the new year. The streets in the city were not crowded. A few months ago, Shu province had lifted the curfew. However, due to the large number of people during the New Year's Day, it was difficult to maintain law and order. In the days before the Lantern Festival, people were not allowed to walk on the streets after midnight. At this moment, it was still early. The shops and houses in the city were still brightly lit. However, outside the city, most of the people had already gone to bed. 10 miles away from the west gate of Yong County, on the dark and difficult-to-walk mountain path, a crowd of people suddenly appeared. At the front of the crowd, Fong Yu looked at the person beside him and said in a low voice, tell them to hurry up. We have to hurry. We must reach the west gate before midnight. Yes, Guardian. The person responded and immediately turned to walk to the back. On the other side, the king of Shu turned and asked, can your people in the city be trusted? Fong Yu nodded and said in a deep voice, don't worry. There are some spies in the holy religion that only purple-clothed emissaries and above are qualified to contact. At midnight, they will open the west gate. When that time comes, we will march straight in. You lead the people and charge straight to the Jiang of Silla residence. We will be responsible for dealing with the guards in Yong County. We will meet outside the west gate in 2 hours. Chapter 10:23. Hearing Fong Yu's words, the king of Shu nodded with a pleased smile on his face. This time, they had mobilized more than 3,000 men, all carefully selected elites. Wouldn't it be a piece of cake to take down Yong County, which only had a few hundred soldiers? He finally had the chance to settle the score with that person. Fong Yu turned around and saw the king of Shu's ferocious face under the moonlight. He frowned and reminded, don't forget, we want to capture him alive this time. When we get the information we need, you can do whatever you want to him. He knew about the blood feud between the king of Shu and Li Yi. He was worried that the king of Shu would kill him in a fit of rage. If that happened, the holy religion would be in vain. They missed the chance to force the king of Tian Fa to reveal the secret recipe last time, but they couldn't miss it this time. The king of Shu nodded and said eerily, don't worry, I can't bear to kill him so quickly. I want to bring him back and play with him slowly. After reminding the king of Shu, Fong Yu looked at the bald man on the other side and cupped his fists. Commander Wang, the success of tonight's operation depends on you. Wang Wei smiled and said, you don't have to worry about that. As long as you can fulfill your promise, leave the soldiers of Yong County to us. Ambassador Fong, do you still not believe in our strength and reputation? Wang Wei looked at him and said with a faint smile. Fong Yu cupped his fists again. Thank you, Commander Wang. I trust your reputation. The key to this operation was the 1,000 men led by the bald man. They were powerful and extremely difficult to deal with. Without them, the holy religion would suffer heavy losses. When the time came, they would be the vanguard, and the holy religion would just have to fulfill their conditions afterward. If there were any accidents and the holy religion suffered heavy losses, it wouldn't matter. The territories of these bald men in the fringe could be taken over by the holy religion. No matter what, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. At first, he was worried that these baldies would easily agree to this and that there might be some kind of trap. But now that things had come to this, there was no turning back. If there was a trap, it could only be that they were colluding with the government and Li Yi. But an official and a bandit, a soldier and a thief, was this possible? Yong County, West Gate. The curfew had arrived, and the shopping malls were all closed. Only a row of soldiers carrying 2 lanterns patrolled back and forth. The West Gate was different from the other 3 gates. Once out of the gate, one would be at the foot of the mountain. There were very few pedestrians there, so the gate was not open all year round. Originally, there was no need for night patrols. Recently, because of the construction of a shopping mall here, they temporarily added such a team to guard against bandits. Late at night before the Lantern Festival, it was still very cold. Being blown by the cold wind, the patrolling soldiers walked more than a dozen laps and felt a little annoyed. However, this was their duty, not to mention that the team leader was still around, so they did not dare to relax at all. After an unknown number of laps, the person at the front signaled for everyone to stop and asked, "What time is it now?" One of them replied, "Sir, it should be almost midnight." "It's already at this time." The team leader said, then turned around and said, "There aren't so many bandits in the city now. There's no need for so many people to be exposed to the cold wind here. How about this, the few of you go back and rest first. After 2 hours, come back and replace us." The people who were pointed out by him were stunned and immediately said, "It's better if the team leader goes back and rest first. We can still hold on." The team leader waved his hand and said, "If I tell you to go, just go. What's with all this nonsense? I still want to walk around a little longer and go back to sleep later in the night." At this point, those people no longer insisted. The captain was injured, so the patrolling of the West Gate was under the responsibility of Captain Su. Naturally, they had to obey his arrangements. The public security of Yong County was good now, and the patrolling was just a casual process. There would not be any major incidents. "Thank you, team leader." The few people nodded, cupped their hands at Captain Su, and dispersed. When their figures completely disappeared, Captain Su looked in the direction of the city gate and murmured, "It's about time. Hurry up, don't delay the great emissary's important matter." He led a few figures through the shopping mall and hurried in the direction of the city gate. In the dense forest outside the western city gate of Yong County, a bald man looked at the city wall that was faintly discernible in the darkness and said in a low voice, "Hey, Envoy Fong, is the person you're talking about reliable? Can he be trusted? Will he stand us up?" Fong Yu did not look back. He looked in the direction of the city wall and shook his head. "Impossible. The people of my holy religion are loyal to Her Majesty. They are absolutely trustworthy. Loyal to Her Majesty." Wang Wei thought for a moment and asked, "Then why can't you contact those believers in Suzhou?" Fong Yu's chest heaved, and he said firmly, "Don't worry, Commander Wang. This time, there will definitely be no problem." "That's hard to say." Wang Wei shook his head, looked at him, and reminded him, "Brother Fong, don't blame me for not reminding you. The moral degeneration of the world is getting worse, and people's hearts are not what they used to be. Some people call you brothers on the surface and seem to be on your side, but they are actually spies of the enemy. At the critical moment, they will betray you and make all your previous efforts go to waste. You have to be careful." All of Fang Yu's attention was on the city gate. Hearing this, he waved his hand and said, "Commander Wang, you worry too much. Do not have the heart to harm others, but do not have the heart to guard against others." Before Wang Wei finished speaking, as if to confirm Fang Yu's words, in the darkness, the tightly closed city gate suddenly opened a gap. Then, it opened wider and wider, until it was completely open. "The city gate is open." The king of Shu suppressed his voice and said in a low and excited voice. "How is it? Do you believe me now, Commander Wang?" Fang Yu glanced at him and said with a smile. "Brothers, what are you waiting for? Charge!" Wang Wei looked behind him and said to the people behind him. Then, he took the lead and led hundreds of people towards the city gate. The king of Shu and Fang Yu looked at them charging in front, and a smile appeared on their faces. These baldies were really trustworthy, to charge in front to attack a city. After Wang Wei and his people rushed down, the king of Shu followed closely behind. According to the intelligence, after rushing through the city gate, they would enter the so-called shopping mall. In the middle of the shopping mall was a huge open space, surrounded by shops, forming a ring shape. The open space in the middle was very big, and it did not seem crowded even when more than 2,000 people rushed in at once. Fang Yu, on the other hand, followed behind everyone with an indifferent expression. This time, after capturing Li Yi and getting the formula of Tian Fa out of him, he could not let the king of Shu kill him. He wanted to let Her Majesty see that there were times when her judgment was wrong. So what if it was Jiang of Silla? So what if it was the left emissary? In the end, didn't they still fall into his hands? Fang Yu thought to himself. When he rushed to the city gate, he looked left and right, but did not see anyone around the city wall that he was hoping to see. He had an agreement with the spies in the city. If the city gate was opened, they would stand outside the city wall, and nothing would go wrong. Otherwise, something unexpected had happened. He stopped in his tracks almost instantly, and once again confirmed that there was no one around the city wall. His expression changed drastically, and he said anxiously, "Retreat, retreat quickly." He turned around quickly, and the two men in purple followed closely behind him. In an instant, they disappeared into the dense forest. The momentum of 3,000 people was so great that only a few dozen people who were closest to him could react. Most of the people had already rushed into the city. At this moment, the king of Shu had already rushed in. His face was full of excitement as he shouted, "Follow me to the Jiang of Silla's residence, and capture Li Yi alive. There's no need to go through so much trouble, I'm right here." A voice came from above. Suddenly, dozens of flames appeared on the city wall. Li Yi stood at the brightest spot on the city wall, looked at the king of Shu, and said, "Come up here." Looking at the figure on the city wall that he could not see clearly, but he felt a sense of familiarity from the depths of his soul, the king of Shu's expression froze. Chapter 10:24. Bang! After a heavy sound, the gate of the shopping mall, which was originally open, was closed. With the light of the fire, one could see that above the city wall were rows of densely packed arrows. In other words, they were surrounded by people. Seeing the densely packed figures on the city wall, especially the faintly discernible face in the fire that he would never forget, the king of Shu's expression changed drastically. Li Yi. He spat out the name through gritted teeth. "I said to be careful of spies." Wang Wei led 1,000 people to block the city gate that they had just entered from. He looked at the king of Shu and shook his head. "Your Highness, look, I didn't overthink, did I? 100 people go and capture Envoy Fang." Wang Wei looked back. Although he didn't know how Envoy Fang saw through them and escaped without entering the city, he couldn't let this big fish escape after planning for so long. Immediately, some people went out of the city gate, while the rest closed the city gate. The king of Shu was stunned. After a long time, he came back to his senses and looked at him. His eyes widened and he said in disbelief, I'm sorry, I'm a spy. Wang Wei looked at him and said, Your Highness, give up your fearless resistance and surrender. Beside the King of Shu, several people immediately shouted, Protect His Highness. They looked around and said loudly, Everyone, don't panic. We have the numbers. Follow me and kill our way out. Kill our way out. Wang Wei looked at them and weighed something in his hand. He said, Do you know what this is? This is heavenly punishment. As long as I throw this out, with a boom, you will. F*CK, who the F*CK ignited it. Seeing that the fuse of the thing in his hand was about to burn out, Wang Wei hurriedly threw the heavenly punishment out. Boom! Although he threw it at the corner of the wall, and the heavenly punishment was a low-quality version with limited power, more than 10 people in the King of Shu's group who were closest to it fell to the ground, moaning in pain. The fire in his eyes had yet to dissipate, and his ears were buzzing, mixed with the moans of the people around him. The power of the heavenly punishment made it so that no one dared to act rashly. If anyone dares to resist, I'll let you have a taste of heavenly punishment. Countless figures had already come down from the city wall, and a dense wave of arrows was aimed at the people in the middle of the open space. The King of Shu's face turned pale in an instant. There were originally 3,000 people in the allied army, but because there was a spy in the middle, it suddenly became 2,000 people. They foolishly rushed into the city gate, but were surrounded here like dumplings, unable to advance or retreat. Put down your weapons and surrender immediately. Fight for leniency. If you resist, kill without mercy. Wang Wei held a paper tube in his hand and shouted, Those who surrender, stand on the left. Those who don't, stand on the right. Everyone move, follow me and kill. Someone in the crowd had just said a few words when an arrow shot out from the front and hit him right between the eyebrows. The man fell to the ground, and the people around him immediately scattered. Seeing this, Wang Wei's voice became cold as he said, If you resist again, you will be punished by the heavens. Everyone, don't be afraid. We have the advantage in numbers. Follow me and kill. Among the crowd, another person revealed a fierce expression. However, just as he finished speaking, there was a commotion beside him. He saw that the surrounding people were avoiding him as if he was the plague and distanced themselves from him. Everyone knew that they were surrounded here, and there was no way out. As long as the people above kept shooting arrows, they would be easily taken care of. Not to mention that the other party had the heavenly punishment divine weapon, which was extraordinarily powerful. If the other party threw one over, wouldn't they be implicated? At the city gate, Wang Wei had already lit an incense stick. He continued to raise his megaphone and shouted, Those who surrender, stand on the left. Those who don't surrender, stand on the right. Move, all of you, move. You only have 5 minutes. After that, immediately release the arrows. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a clamor of footsteps from the crowd. Wang Wei looked at the dense crowd and shouted, Yes, just like that. Put down your weapons, put your hands behind your head, and squat. Not only did they not have the advantage in numbers, but they were also surrounded by the other party. Emissary Fong of the right was nowhere to be seen, and the holy religion was without a leader. Under Wang Wei's coercion, they could only stand on the left. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the King of Shu looked at the remaining people around him and murmured, They're gone, they're all gone. Li Yi came down from the city wall and walked to the King of Shu. The King of Shu looked at the few people around him, and then at the bald men pointing arrows at them. His gaze finally stopped on Li Yi. At this time, it had been less than 4 years since they first met. He still remembered that their first meeting was at the Cold Mountain Temple. In the second year of Jing He's reign, the plum blossoms in the Cold Mountain Temple were in full bloom. He stood together with Li Xian, whom he hated the most. From that time on, he didn't like this scholar of the Jing kingdom, who had just made a name for himself. At that time, he was still the king of Shu, the prince closest to that position. He disregarded his feud with Li Xian and condescended to invite him to a banquet at the king's mansion, but what about him? He and Li Xian made a mess of his banquet, making him a laughing stock in the circle of the nobles in the capital. Then, he beat him up in the palace in front of all the court officials, seriously injuring him, and continued to get away with it. Then, he uprooted his power in the court one by one. He drove him out of the capital. He made him get further and further away from that position, the position that he had dreamed of for more than 20 years. Then, he extinguished his last shred of hope. The Cui family fell, his mother died, he became a fugitive, and he became the Jiang of Silla. He took over his fief and his mansion. Now, he had finally found a chance to wash away the shame he had suffered. However, Li Yi was standing right in front of him. They had never been so close to each other, nor had they been so far away from each other. The moment he met Li Yi, he missed his whole life. How good would it have been if he hadn't met Li Yi in the winter when the plum blossoms were in full bloom in the second year of Jinghe? However, there were no ifs. Cough. Cough. The king of Shu bent over and couldn't stop coughing. He covered his mouth, but blood still seeped out from between his fingers. He suddenly pulled out a saber from the waist of a guard beside him and slashed at Li Yi. A crazed look appeared on his face. Li Yi, I'm going to kill you. Li Yi pinched the tip of the saber. No matter how much strength the king of Shu used, the long saber couldn't move an inch. He exerted a little force and the saber flew out of the king of Shu's hand. He casually threw it to the ground, making a crisp, clanged sound. The king of Shu's body fell limply to the ground. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He lowered his head and panted heavily. You traitors, I am the emperor. How dare you rebel? At a certain moment, he suddenly raised his head and pointed at Li Yi. He took a few deep breaths and his face was no longer pale. Instead, it turned rosy. He got up from the ground, put one hand on his waist, and laughed wildly. Li Yi, Jiang of Silla, you are just a prince. Why don't you kneel before me? Treason, you are treason. I want to punish you for your crimes, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to exterminate your entire family. Li Yi looked at the crazed king of Shu and shook his head. He waved his hand and said, take him away. Don't touch me. The expression on the king of Shu's face became terrified. He shouted, you unruly people, where is the imperial army, Guards. These unruly people want to harm me. Chapter 1025. On the morning of the 12th day of the first lunar month, Butcher Jing opened the door with dark circles under his eyes and saw the waiter of the restaurant across the street sitting listlessly on the threshold. Butcher Jing glanced at him and said, Hey, Gooden, what did you do last night? Why are you so sleepy? The waiter glanced at him and said weakly, how dare you say that? If your wife hadn't screamed last night, the whole street would have heard her. How could I be so sleepy? If you two do that again next time. It's none of your business whether my wife screamed or not. Why can't you sleep? Butcher Zheng looked at him with a dark face and asked, next time. What do you want to do next time? The waiter named Gooden was stunned. He looked at him and asked in surprise, can I? Butcher Zheng picked up a boning knife and tilted his ear, asking, Come over here and tell me what you want to do. I just want to tell you that you must have public morality. Do you want me and my neighbors to go and play drums and cheer for you next time? The waiter shook his head. Butcher Zheng's wife was stronger than him. Even looking at Butcher Zheng was more interesting than looking at his wife. He stood up and said angrily, I don't know who it was last night who set off firecrackers in the middle of the night. It was so loud that I felt the bed move. I was woken up just as I fell asleep. Don't let me catch that bastard. If I do, I'll skin him alive. Butcher Jing didn't care about the guy who set off firecrackers last night. He was also angry with that bastard. Yesterday, he was preparing to have a baby with his wife. At the critical moment, he was scared out of his wits by the sound of firecrackers. Later, he found his wits, but he was lost. He was only allowed to go to bed after being kicked a few times by his wife who hadn't had enough fun. Speaking of that person, Butcher Zheng was enraged. He waved the knife in his hand and said angrily, "If I catch him, I'll cut his bones." Last night, many people in Yong County didn't sleep well, especially those near the West City Gate. A few days ago, when there was no curfew, everyone's nightlife would last until very late. These days, after the curfew, as soon as the sky turned dark, it was time to sleep. But regardless of whether they were sleeping or sleeping, they were all startled by the loud noise that occurred around midnight last night. The sound was so loud that even the ground beneath their feet shook. The first impression it gave people was that the sky had collapsed. Some people even mistakenly thought that it was an earth dragon turning over and hurriedly ran out of their houses. They stayed outside for most of the night and only dared to walk back into their rooms after seeing that nothing was out of place. During the day, everything returned to normal. The shops opened for business, and the commoners continued with their daily activities. Observant people would notice that a part of the city wall in the shopping mall was slightly charred, as if it had been burned. Most people only cursed the fellow who had fired the cannon in their hearts. Wang Wei didn't realize that he was responsible for firing the cannon last night. He stood in front of Li Yi, shook his head, and said with some regret, "Prince, the rest of the people from the holy religion have been captured. 2 of the purple-clothed emissaries escaped, and that emissary Fong of the right has also escaped. I've already sent my brothers to their lair. This time, their elites have all gone, so it'll be easy to wipe them out." Fong rubbed his shiny head and said regretfully, "Young master, I was too rash. I shouldn't have captured those fellows who opened the city gate yesterday. Otherwise, that Fong guy," halfway through his sentence, he realized that his surname was also Fong, so he added, "that emissary of the right won't be able to escape." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's all right. If he escaped, then so be it. We'll meet again in the future. Let's talk about it next time." This time, he managed to capture the king of Shu and the elites of the holy religion in the fringe without losing a single soldier. He also managed to capture more than 2,000 people. What else could he be dissatisfied with? Not only did emissary Fong of the right escape, but he also left the king of Shu alive. To him, the king of Shu was obviously more important than Fong Yu. Ever since he entered the capital, he and the king of Shu had never stopped fighting openly and secretly. It was only yesterday that their feud finally came to an end. However, even he didn't expect that it would end up like this. After experiencing the ups and downs of life, he never got up again. He fell many times, and when he finally got the chance to get up again, he fell from heaven to hell in an instant. The king of Shu actually went crazy. When he was taken away, he was still shouting things like, "Protect the emperor, rebel," and "There are always unruly people who want to harm the emperor." After he went crazy, he imagined himself to be the emperor. He had wanted to be the emperor all his life, and now his dream had finally come true. Although he was only deceiving himself, at least he succeeded. Fong touched his bald head again and asked, "Son-in-law, what should we do with the king of Shu?" Li Yi stood up and said, "I'll go see him first." After Li Yi left, Wang Wei looked at Fong and asked, "Brother Fong, is a bald head good to touch? How does it feel?" Fong nodded and said, "Not bad. Even if it feels good." Wang Wei removed the hand that was rubbing his head and asked, "Can't you touch your own head? You're crazy." Fong glanced at him and said, "If I had a bald head, would I need to touch yours?" His words were eloquent and reasonable. Wang Wei opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to refute. The king of Shu was temporarily imprisoned in the manor prison. When Li Yi walked in, Chen Chong followed behind him and said, "The king of Shu has been making a big fuss since last night, calling himself Wei. Last night, while he was asleep, I had a doctor take a look at him. He said that his pulse is extremely chaotic. It should be because he suffered a huge psychological blow and his mind is injured. Perhaps he will wake up after a period of time, or perhaps he will be like this forever." How could he not be shocked? If the king of Shu had not suffered a psychological blow, then the one being imprisoned would be Li Yi himself. After saying a few words, Chen Chong looked at him and asked, "What do you plan to do with the king of Shu?" Li Yi looked at the innermost cell and said, "Send him back to the capital." In the innermost cell of the manor prison, the king of Shu placed his hands on his hips and raised his head. He looked at the people in the cell next door and said loudly, "You unruly people, why don't you kneel when you see us? Let us tell you, our reinforcements will be here soon. If you kneel before us now, we will get them to save you all in a while. Humph, you unruly people, how dare you not kneel when you see us? We will not get anyone to save you." The people in the cell next door leaned against the wall and sighed as they looked at the king of Shu, who was talking to himself. How could a normal person go crazy just like that? The king of Shu turned around angrily and suddenly saw a familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he immediately laughed wildly and said, Lord Qin, you're here. Are you here to save us? Ha, you unruly people, do you see that? Our reinforcements are here. Lord Chen is here to save us. It's not too late for you to kneel before us now. Looking at the king of Shu laughing wildly in the cell, Chen Chong stopped in his tracks. The expression on his face was extremely complicated. No matter what, the Qin family had been loyal to the king of Shu for a period of time. Seeing this scene, he felt a different feeling in his heart. Lord Qin, quickly come and save us. When we return, we will make you the prime minister. Tell us what you want to be, and when we return, we will make you. His gaze swept to the side, and when he saw the person standing beside Chen Chong, his expression changed drastically. He hid in a corner and shouted, Li Yi, you traitor, you captured us, you want a rebel. Imperial father will not let you off, Imperial mother will not let you off, no one in the world will let you off. After shouting a few words, he quickly ran over and grabbed the bars. With a face full of anticipation, he said, Li Yi, let me go. Let me go, please. Don't you remember? Have you forgotten that I treated you to a meal? I even treated you to a meal. Seeing the king of Shu like this, Li Yi's heart was also filled with mixed feelings. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. He just wanted to live a good life. Rui and the others. Whether the king of Shu became the emperor or not had nothing to do with him. If not for that meal, if not for Qin Yu, perhaps the two of them would not have such an ending today. The king of Shu knelt on the ground and said loudly, Li Yi, let me go. Whatever you want, I can give it to you. At some point, a look of understanding appeared on his face, and he said loudly, I know what you want. This emperor will give it to you, this emperor will give it to you, this emperor will give it to you. Release this emperor will immediately add an edict for Mingzhu to marry you. Let me go. Not only will I let Mingzhu marry you, I will also let Li Xian marry you. Chapter 10:26. Li Yi looked at Chen Chong, who was staring at him with a strange gaze, and explained, Don't look at me like that. His Majesty and I are innocent. And with the princess? With the princess, it's just holding hands and kissing the cheek. That's all. There's nothing else. I know. Chen Chong nodded. You and His Majesty are innocent. Li Yi looked at him and said, but the look in your eyes hasn't changed. Chen Chong lowered his head and said nothing. Of all the officials in court, only he and His Majesty believed that they were innocent. Everyone knew that His Majesty and Jiang of Silla were as close as brothers and that His Majesty favored him even more than Her Majesty the Empress. Who would believe that they were innocent? But he could not say this in front of Chen Chong. Based on his understanding of Li Yi, if he bore a grudge against you, he would not fall out with you on the surface, but he would make things difficult for you in the future. Everyone knew of His Highness Jiang of Silla's pettiness, just like his relationship with His Majesty. He changed his gaze and said, the King of Shu is like this. How can I bring him back to the capital? Chen Chong's words were reasonable. The King of Shu had been a respectable person before he went crazy. It would be too shameful to have him return to the capital like this. It would not only hurt the King of Shu's own face, but also the face of the imperial family. Li Yi ordered the jailer behind him open the prison door. The jailer did not ask any questions and went forward to open the door. Thank you, thank you. The King of Shu walked out and said seriously, I will send Mingzu to your room today, and the day after tomorrow, I will send Li Xian. Thump. Li Yi reached out and lightly chopped at the King of Shu's neck. The king fell to the ground. This is much more respectable. Li Yi looked at Chen Chong and said, don't delay this matter. Tomorrow, secretly escort him back to the capital. If he continues to make trouble on the way, just knock him out. Chen Chong was startled, then nodded. Okay. He pointed at the unconscious King of Shu and ordered the jailer, bring him back first. Why did he go crazy? The jailer sighed. The King of Shu, who was lying on the ground, suddenly jumped up and grabbed him by the neck. He said angrily, I'm not crazy. I'm the emperor. I'm the ruler of a country. You unruly people, unruly people. Bang! Chen Chong chopped down on the King of Shu's neck with even greater force than Li Yi's. The King of Shu fell to the ground again. Chen Chong waved his hand and said, take him away, son-in-law. Do you think the madness of the King of Shu is real? Fong squatted on the ground, looked at Li Yi, and asked, it said that there are people who are unwilling to remember certain things because they suffered a blow, so they sealed a part of their memories. It sounds very mysterious. Is there really such a thing? Really, Li Yi said casually. Although this kind of thing sounded mysterious, it was not uncommon in the history of medicine. It was no longer important whether the King of Shu was really crazy or not. Based on Li Xian's style of doing things, he might not kill the King of Shu. However, the King of Shu would not be able to leave the capital in this lifetime. As for the one imprisoned in the capital, what difference did it make whether the King of Shu was really crazy or not? Now that the matter with the King of Shu had come to an end, he was thinking about other matters. This time, the King of Shu was captured and Fong Yu escaped. They had already taken over the fringe. However, they still could not find Fong Yu. When they arrived, the fringe was already deserted. Only a few bandits who were captured were left behind. The fringe was huge. Even if the King of Shu, Fong Yu, and the others joined forces, they could only occupy a small piece of land. Of course, no matter which side they were on, they were still one of the few major powers in the fringe. Now, the territories near the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom had been unified by them. Only some major powers in the north near the Wu Kingdom had yet to be conquered. Li Yi, Wang Wei, and the others discussed for a while and decided not to make a move so soon. They would wait until they had stabilized their current territories before advancing. When that time came, the fringe would have to change its surname, whether it was Li or Lu, it was all the same. Moreover, the surname Lu would eventually belong to the surname Li. These details could be ignored for the time being. Fong squatted on the ground. He was waiting for Li Yi to explain to him. However, Li Yi only gave a perfunctory reply and did not say anything else. He had already noticed that the young master did not seem to like to talk to him recently. Thinking about it carefully, other than the time when the princess sent a letter to Mississippi Lu, he did not offend him in any way. He thought for a moment and took out a letter from his sleeve. He said, "Young master, actually, the princess sent me a letter today." "I didn't let second miss see it." Li Yi quietly hid the letter in his sleeve. He did not know why, but when he looked at Fong again, he found him much more pleasing to the eye. "Not bad. You did a good job this time." He patted Fong's shoulder and quietly returned to his room. He closed the door and leaned against it. He couldn't wait to take out the letter from his sleeve. He had been waiting for this letter from Emingzu for a long time. On the cover, there were 4 big words, to Li Yi. Li Yi was startled and his face darkened. He glared fiercely at the door. "This Fong, is he stupid? This is a letter from Emingzu, not from Mississippi Lu. Why is he acting so secretive? It's like he's meeting with an underground gang. What's there to be afraid of when it's his own letter?" Li Yi was stunned when he opened the letter. There was no letter paper. There was no letter paper in the envelope. Could it be that when she sent the letter, she forgot to put the content in it? Li Yi's eyes were a little moist. It was not easy for him to wait for a letter from her. It had been 9 months. He was about to marry Zumo Ruoqing, but he only waited for such a letter, and it was a letter without content. Did she let him imagine it himself? He turned the envelope over and over, but still did not find the content of the letter. But he found a bunch of hair in the envelope. This hair should not have been put in accidentally, because it was not one or a few strands, but a bunch, tied with a red band. It was not long, and one end was the tip of the hair, and the other end was cut very neatly. It should have been cut with a sharp tool such as scissors. It was very strange for Emingzu to write a letter. Last time, she sent a beating and asked Rui to do it. This time, she sent a bunch of hair. Why didn't she send a kiss and ask Rui to do it? Li Yi was about to sit down and study it. After taking 2 steps, he saw Rui sitting at the desk, holding a book in his hand and looking at him. He was stunned and asked, "Rui, when did you come here?" "It's been an hour." Mississippi Lu put down the book in her hand, looked at him, and asked, "What's in your hand?" Li Yi looked down at it, then looked at her and said, "A letter." Mississippi Lu asked, "Li Emingzu sent it?" Li Yi was surprised and said, "How do you know?" "When Uncle Fong secretly gave it to you just now, I heard it." Li Yi straightened the envelope and pointed at the words, "For Li Yi," on it. He said solemnly, "You see, this time it's for me. I didn't peek at your letter." Mississippi Lu nodded and asked, "What did she say?" Then she added, "Of course, if it's something private, I won't ask. After all, I'm not like some people who have a hobby of prying into other people's privacy." Li Yi didn't like what she said. What did she mean by having a hobby of prying into other people's privacy? That was concern. Concern was to help her and Emingzu establish the right outlook on life, values, and the world. She didn't want them to go astray. What's so good about prying into other people's privacy? You'll get beaten for prying into other people's privacy. It was obvious that she wanted to know, but she pretended that she didn't care. Ha, women, what privacy? In order to prove his innocence, Li Yi handed over the envelope and said, "There's no privacy between us. You can take a look." Mississippi Lu took the envelope, opened it, and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi looked at the empty envelope and was stunned. After a while, he looked at her and asked, "If I say that she didn't say anything and there's no letter in this envelope, would you believe me?" Chapter 10:27. There's no letter in this letter. Do you believe me? Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu with a sincere expression. Other than the tongue twister that almost made him bite his tongue, he did not seem to be faking it at all. Because he was not faking it at all. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Are you talking about tongue twisters?" "Speaking of tongue twisters, I've actually studied them some time ago." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, 800 soldiers rushed to the north slope, red carp and green carp and donkey, black fertilizer evaporates and turns black, gray fertilizer evaporates and turns black, gray fertilizer evaporates and turns black. Yes, play. Li Yi stopped talking about tongue twisters because he just bit his tongue and it hurt. Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, "I know there's nothing in that letter. I saw it just now. I'm just joking." She stood up and picked up the book she was reading just now. She said, "By the way, lend this book to me for 2 days. I'll return it to you when I'm done." "What book?" Li Yi asked casually. "Chen Shimi and Qin Xianglian." Mississippi Lu waved her hand and said, "It's about the ungrateful Chen Shimi who married a princess and abandoned his wife. In the end, he was killed by Master Bao." This kind of ungrateful, fickle person, Li Yi found that Mississippi Lu's use of idioms was getting better and better. But that was not the main point. The main point was that she only needed to tell him what book she had borrowed. He wrote the script himself. Didn't he know what kind of story Chen Shimi and Qin Xianglian was about? Did he ask her what the book was about? Ah, women. Cough. Cough. Seeing Mississippi Lu's gaze, Li Yi coughed twice and walked over. He took a book from the table and handed it to her. He said, "If you have time, you should read this book. It's quite good. Girls should read more." Mississippi Lu reached out and took it. She asked, "What book is this?" "A Huang and Nuying." Li Yi looked at her and explained, "This book is about Emperor Yao having 2 daughters. The elder sister is a Huang and the younger sister is Nuying. Both sisters follow the teachings of the court, nurturing themselves and are pure in nature. One is gentle and virtuous, beautiful and intelligent, while the other is unruly, unreasonable and barbaric. They are both sisters, but why is the difference between them so big?" Seeing the change in Mississippi Lu's gaze, Li Yi hurriedly said, "Of course, none of this is important." "What's important is, what's important?" Mississippi Lu continued to ask. "I forgot." Li Yi sat in front of the desk and said, "It's boring to listen to others talk about it. It's better for you to see for yourself." Mississippi Lu turned around and walked out of the room. As she walked out of the room, Li Yi suddenly remembered something and quickly said, "Rui, wait a minute." Mississippi Lu turned around and looked at him. Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, "Rui, if you are a woman." "No, you are a woman. What does it mean to give someone a bunch of hair?" Soon, drunk Mo and Ruoqing would enter the door. Li Xian could not come, but he did not forget the gift. According to what he said in the letter, it was a generous gift, but Emingzu only gave a bunch of hair. This was too unkind. Hair, wishing that he would have a good start in the new year. Black hair tied to the hair, forever tied to the same heart. When a woman gives her hair to a man, it means that she has fallen in love with him. When a husband and wife get married, they also have to tie the hair. Mississippi Lu explained, looked at him, and asked, "Why, did a woman give you hair?" Li Yi put his left hand behind his back, shook his head, and said solemnly, "No, no, how could it be?" Fong watched the son-in-law walk into the room with the letter and closed the door. After a while, the door opened, and second Miss came out from inside. Her eyes suddenly widened. After a while, Li Yi came out from inside with a sullen face, looked at Fong, and said, "Emingzu wrote the letter to me, not to Rui. Does it matter if she read it or not? Do you need to be so sneaky? Are you stupid? Son-in-law, can you read the letter from Princess Royal to second Miss?" Can you not read the letter from Princess Royal to second Miss? Son-in-law, don't you know in your heart? Fong rolled his eyes, looked at Li Yi, and asked, son-in-law, who is stupid? After listening to Fong's words, Li Yi's heart suddenly sank. His IQ was even lower than Fong's. He couldn't read the letter that Emingzu wrote to Rui, but Rui couldn't not read the letter that Emingzu wrote to him. So no matter who the letter was written to, as long as it was written by Emingzu, he had to hide it from her secretly. Li Yi looked at Fong. Even he understood the logic, but he didn't think of it immediately. He suddenly felt an unprecedented heartache. There's another letter here. I forgot to give it to you just now. Fong took out another envelope from his sleeve and handed it to Li Yi. Li Yi looked at him and asked, whose is this? Fong shook his head and said, I don't know. There's no name on it. It was sent with the princess letter. Although there's no recipient, it's definitely for son-in-law. Li Yi reached out to take it, and he was stunned. The envelope was bulging, and it was thicker than the 2 scripts that Mississippi Lu had just taken away. Could it be that Li Xian had written the problems that he had encountered into a book? This D*Ned man, did he really think that he was Baidu? Even Baidu wasn't that convenient. There was no signature on the letter, but according to Li Xian's style of doing things, Li Yi felt that his guess was most likely correct. He instantly lost the urge to open the envelope. He put the envelope aside, looked at the bundle of hair in his hand, and fell into deep thought. What did Emingzu mean by sending him a bundle of hair? Was it to congratulate him on getting rich in the new year, or was there something else? As for what Mississippi Lu said about being together forever, he didn't really believe it. This was something that only young girls would do. It was possible that Shanning would do it, but for Emingzu, what if that was what she meant? Li Yi couldn't figure it out no matter how he thought about it. He couldn't help but complain in his heart. What did she want to say? Couldn't she have written it more clearly? A woman's mind was the hardest to guess. Then he tore open the envelope on the table. Since he had nothing else to do, he would reluctantly solve 2 of Li Xian's problems. There was indeed a book in the envelope. To be precise, it was a thick book. The cover was blank, and there were no words. Li Yi sat on the chair, crossed his legs, and opened the first page. The handwriting on the paper was neat and beautiful, and it was pleasing to the eye. Sir, I thought for a long time, and I still decided to write to you. Since he left the capital city, there was only one person who still called him sir. Seeing the first sentence, Li Yi put down his crossed legs and sat up straight. The relaxed expression on his face gradually became serious. Fong squatted at the side, glanced at him, and quietly squatted a little further away. When Li Yi put the thick letter on the table, he moved a little further away, and stopped at the door. A few days before I wrote to Sir, the plum blossoms in the cold mountain temple bloomed again. My royal sister took me to see it once. The people in the capital city all said that this was the year when the plum blossoms in the cold mountain temple bloomed the most. It's a pity that my painting isn't as good as Sir's. Otherwise, I could draw this year's plum blossoms and keep it for you to see when you come back. Her handwriting was neat from beginning to end, and it could be seen how serious she was when she wrote the letter. The letter was very long and trivial. On one page, she would write how beautiful the plum blossoms in the cold mountain temple were, and on another page, she would write about the death of the old man who bought candy figurines on the street, and she had been sad for a long time. On another page, she would write about what she had seen in the academy, and at some point, she would mention that she was now in charge of the women's union, and there were many things she didn't know how to do, and she was learning slowly. Li Yi could feel her mood from her words, her joy, anger, sorrow, and joy, as if she were by his side. He held up the letter that could already be called a book, and carefully read word by word, line by line, and page by page. His eyebrows gradually relaxed, and a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. When Su Jing walked in from outside, he was stopped by Fong at the door. Fong looked back at the figure who had been sitting quietly in the courtyard for a long time, and whispered, "Don't disturb him." Chapter 10:28. Squatting at the door, Fong glanced at Su Jing, who was waiting there quietly, and said, "Old Su, why are you looking for the son-in-law? Tell me. Maybe I can think of a way, so there's no need to trouble him. The son-in-law is busy all day, so it's better not to make trouble for him." Su Jing just looked at him indifferently and said nothing. "Hey, why are you looking at me like that? Are you looking down on me?" Fong straightened up and looked at him with a slightly angry expression. "Although I'm not as smart as the son-in-law, I'm not far behind. Sometimes, the son-in-law isn't as smart as me. Tell me, what's the matter? I'll help you think of a way." Su Jing looked at him and said, "We have a goddess and a protector, and the other side also has a goddess and a protector. In terms of numbers, we don't have the advantage. Most of the captive believers are from the Qi kingdom, and many of them are unwilling to surrender." After saying that, he looked at Fong and asked, "What's your idea?" In Fong's eyes, there was no normal person in the holy religion except for the son-in-law and Miss Ruoqing. No, except for Miss Ruoqing, there was no normal person. Including Su Jing in front of him, no one knew what was going on in their minds. They were extremely paranoid and crazy. They were a group of lunatics. What could he do to a bunch of lunatics like this? Was he supposed to press their heads and make them submit to him? Seeing that Su Jing was still looking at him, Fong glared at him and said, "What are you looking at me for?" Su Jing said, "I'm waiting for your idea." "Why are you waiting for my idea? Whether they are willing to surrender or not, does it have anything to do with me?" Fong glanced at him and asked, "You still have to ask me this kind of question. What are you doing as a purple envoy?" Su Jing was a very serious person. He looked at him and said, "You just said you could think of a way." Fong thought for a moment, then suddenly looked at him and asked, "How old are you this year?" Su Jing looked at him and said, 28. "Do you have an in-laws?" Fong asked again. "No." Fong pointed at him and said somewhat exasperatedly, "You're already 28 years old, and you're about to reach your 30s. You don't even have a wife. When I was 28, my son could already work in the fields. You don't want to pass on the incense to your Su family. What's the use of thinking about all this nonsense all day?" Su Jing looked at him and asked, "What's the use of having a mother-in-law? Is it to be afraid like you?" When Li Yi walked out of the courtyard, he saw Fong lift Su Jing up with one hand and was about to throw him into the lotus pond in front. "What are you doing?" Only when Fong heard the voice did he put Su Jing down. Su Jing straightened his collar, his expression unchanged as he said, "There are hundreds of believers who are still unwilling to surrender. Most of them are from the Qi kingdom. Our influence in the Qi kingdom is not as great as theirs." The holy religion was now clearly divided into two parts. One was the Qi kingdom branch with Taoist nun as its concubine, and the other was the Jing kingdom branch with Ruoqing as its concubine. The Taoist nun's influence in the Jing kingdom was not as great as that of Ruoqing, and Ruoqing's importance in the hearts of the believers in the Qi kingdom was not as great as that of Taoist nun. Now that there was a conflict between the two concubines and they needed to take sides, there would be two completely different choices. "I understand." Li Yi nodded and said, "You can go now. I have my own way of dealing with this matter." "Okay." Su Jing cupped his hands in obeisance and simply turned to leave. Fong stared at Li Yi with wide eyes and asked curiously, "What is your way, son-in-law?" He really couldn't figure it out. They didn't want to believe him, so what could he do? Could the son-in-law control what they were thinking? According to his experience, when the son-in-law said he had a way, he really did have a way. This was different from him. It seemed that the son-in-law was indeed a little smarter than him. He had to face this fact. For Li Yi, the problem of the believers of the holy religion was not simple, but it was not difficult either. As long as he found the right problem and applied the right medicine, he would soon see results. At present, the first thing on his mind was the upcoming wedding. When the officials and nobles in the capital married concubines, they would quietly carry them into the house in a sedan chair. They wouldn't make too much of a fuss. At most, they would invite some relatives and friends to get together. Li Yi also didn't intend to make the whole Shuzhou bustling. He didn't intend to announce it with great fanfare, nor did he want to invite the officials of Shuzhou. Although he could receive a lot of gifts, did he care about these things? However, it couldn't be too simple. After all, for women, this was one of the most important things in their lives. Whether it was Zuamo or Ruoqing, they couldn't be wronged. Of course, seriously speaking, this was also his first marriage, so he had to take it seriously, if the last time he was knocked unconscious didn't count. He walked into the room. Rui was looking at the clothes in the wardrobe and worrying. Seeing him come in, she hurriedly pulled him over and asked, "Husband, what do you think I should wear on the day my two sisters marry?" Li Yi was dazzled by the clothes in her wardrobe and said, "My wife looks good in anything." Rui shook her head and said, "That won't do. I have to choose one." Li Yi closed the wardrobe, put his arm around her waist, and said, "There's no need to choose. I've already chosen the clothes you want to wear on that day." "Which one?" Rui asked in confusion. Li Yi led her to the bed, opened a box at the head of the bed, and rummaged out a piece of clothing. He said, "Just wear this." Rui was stunned, and then she shook her head and said, "Don't talk nonsense, husband. How can I wear this? Because I haven't seen my wife in this dress." Li Yi put the wedding dress on the bed, held her in his arms, and said, "Last time, I got married in a daze. Later, I thought about it. How can I be so careless about marriage? So this time, I want to marry again." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "My wife, are you willing to marry again?" "Husband. Dwainer is already 2 years old." Rui looked at him with a red face and whispered, "If we do this, others will laugh. I'll see who dares to laugh." "No way." Li Yi moved closer to her ear, sucked her earlobe, and asked softly, "Can I?" Rui's soft body collapsed in his arms, and her cheeks were red. She said as if she was sleep-talking, "Yes." When Xiao Huan passed by the courtyard, she stopped and turned back to take a curious look. Why was the door of the young master and the young lady's room closed again? It was clearly open just now. When Li Yi walked into another small courtyard, Xiao Chui was playing happily under the sun with a prism. Among Xiao Huan, Xiao Zhu, and Xiao Chui, she was the best at playing. She was the best at playing shuttlecock, and she was also the best at playing kickboxing. She could even play more tricks than others. At this moment, she was showing Fong the phenomenon of using a prism to make a rainbow under the sun. Fong was obviously not interested in making a rainbow. He squatted beside her and whispered, "Xiao Chui, I have something to discuss with you." "What's the matter, Uncle Fong?" Xiao Chui adjusted the angle of the prism and asked casually. Fong looked at her and said, "You see, you call Xiao Hong sister, and I call you Uncle Fong. Between these two, is there a gap in seniority?" Xiao Chui couldn't change the way she called him. This was a sore point in his heart. Other people wanted to raise their seniority, but he just wanted her to call him Big Brother Fong. Was this request too much? Xiao Chui raised her head and blinked her eyes. She asked, "What do you mean?" "You see, your Xiao Hong sister is with me now. We are of the same generation." Fong looked at her and said patiently, "You call me Uncle Fong, and you call her Xiao Hong sister. Is there a gap in seniority?" Xiao Chui thought about it and came to a realization. She nodded and said, "It seems so." She looked at Fong and said seriously, "I'm sorry, I won't call you that in the future." Lao Fong suddenly felt tears welling up in his eyes and his nose tingling. It had been 3 years, almost 3 years. She was finally enlightened. Xiao Chui looked at him and said sincerely, Uncle Fong, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'll call her Aunt Xiao Hong from now on. Seeing Fong standing there in a daze with tears in his eyes, Xiao Chui was startled and asked, Uncle Fong, what's wrong? It's nothing. Fong wiped his eyes and looked up at the sky. He said, the sun today is a little poisonous. My eyes hurt and I'm tearing up. Xiao Chui looked up and said doubtfully, the sun today is not poisonous, not poisonous. Fong lowered his head and shook it. He said, that's because I thought of my dead mother, aw. Fong wiped his eyes and sighed. If she didn't die, she would be living a happy life now. Chapter 1029. Li Yi could see that Fong was a little confused. Otherwise, he would not have made such a helpless, pained, and disheartened expression. Even when he thought of his mother who had died early before she could enjoy her happiness, he would not have been like this. Miss and Sister Ruoqing are in the room. Son-in-law, you can go in by yourself. Xiao Chui continued to play with her prism. Since the matter with drunken Imo and Ruoqing was settled, she had changed the way she addressed herself. This was learned from Xiao Huan. Later, Xiao Zhu also followed suit. Li Yi walked into the room. Xiao Chui had already made a rainbow. Looking at Fong, she said proudly, Uncle Fong, look, isn't it beautiful? I can also use other methods to make a rainbow, Sister Xiao Chui. Lao Fong looked at her and said seriously, I'm calling you sister. Can you let me finish talking? Xiao Chui put down the prism, shook her head, and said shyly, Uncle Fong, you are too polite. I am much younger than you. Drunken Imo and Ruoqing were both in the room. The two sat by the bed, on which there were two neatly arranged wedding dresses. Drunken Imo generously pointed to the bed and said, Sister Ruoqing, which one do you want? Take your pick. Ruoqing looked at her and said doubtfully, but you embroidered all these. Drunken Imo frowned and said, so what if I embroidered it? Didn't I say long ago that my things are your things? Why do we need to separate yours and mine? Li Yi stood behind them and asked, what about me? You? Drunken Imo looked back, rolled her eyes at him, and said, you are not a thing. Li Yi did not know whether she was saying that he was good or bad, so he was pushed out by her. Drunken Imo pushed him out of the door and said, I am discussing an important matter with Sister Ruoqing. You can come in later. Looking at the closed door, Li Yi shook his head. Wasn't it just discussing who was going to wear which wedding dress? Was there any difference? So what if she wore it? When the time came, she would still have to take it off. He walked to the side and decided to watch Emerald perform her magic for a while. Using a Mitsubishi mirror to create a rainbow was the most basic. Advanced players like Emerald had already mastered the method of creating a rainbow. As long as the weather was right, they could create a rainbow using a homemade sprayer, a basin of water, and a mirror. In the room, Drunk Ink looked at Ruoqing and said, although you didn't embroider it yourself, there's no time to embroider it now. Fortunately, I'm thoughtful. Just make do with it, don't bother about these things. Ruoqing shook her head and said, I'm not fussing over it. You know, it's not easy for me to wear this dress. I know, you're the Empress. You can't let them see the Empress wearing a wedding dress. Drunk Ink looked at her and asked, but do you think they will let you wear a wedding dress? Hearing this, Ruoqing blushed inexplicably and whispered, I can wear it in private. You don't need to wear it in private. Drunk Ink pressed her shoulder and let her sit on the bed. You don't have to worry about these things. Who cares about the Empress? You just have to be your bride in peace. She took off her shoes and socks and jumped onto the bed. Don't hesitate. Put it on first. This is the first time in my life that I'm wearing a wedding dress. Ruoqing had no choice but to agree. Soon, in the room, in front of a dressing mirror that was as tall as a person, there were two more brides. Both of them were already very beautiful, and now that they were wearing wedding dresses, it added a bit of soul-stirring charm. Drunk Ink looked at the mirror for a long time before snorting softly. That guy got lucky. When she and Ruoqing sat back on the bed, she seemed to think of something and suddenly looked at Ruoqing. What's wrong? Ruoqing was a little confused by her gaze and looked at her. Drunk Ink was startled and suddenly asked, although we married at the same time, there has to be a sequence. Tell me, who came first and who came last? Of course it's you first. There was no need to hesitate on this question. To be exact, it was Drunk Ink who met him first, and they were also together first. I'll go first. Drunk Ink suddenly revealed an inexplicable smile on her face. She looked at her and asked, then does little Ruoqing have to call me big sister? Ruoqing looked up at her and finally seemed to understand something, and her face became even redder. Ha! Drunk Ink couldn't help but laugh heartily and pushed her down on the bed. I've called you big sister for more than 10 years, and now I can finally turn things around. Little Ruoqing, quickly call me big sister. Ruoqing's face was crimson and she gritted her teeth. No. Drunk Ink snorted coldly. No, if you don't blame me for punishing you. Does anyone need my help? Li Yi stood by the window and asked as he watched the two people rolling on the bed. Whether it was to help Ruoqing resist Drunk Ink or to help Drunk Ink punish Ruoqing, he could help. Bang! Looking at the tightly closed window, Li Yi shook his head and turned to walk back to the yard. Drunk Ink and Ruoqing didn't bring him out, Rui and Emingzu didn't bring him out, Rui and Xiaohuan didn't bring him out for a bath, and he actually degenerated to watch Xiao Chui turn into a rainbow with Fong, the Shu King's mansion. The Shu King's mansion was no longer the Shu King's mansion. At best, it could only be called the former site of the Shu King's mansion. In a spacious hall, the door was closed and the windows were closed from the outside. Hundreds of people were crowded in the hall, and most of them sat quietly on the ground, expressionless. Envoy Su, don't waste your effort anymore. The person sitting at the very front opened his eyes and looked at the young man standing in front of him. He said, I'll also give you a piece of advice. You and I shouldn't interfere in the affairs of the two goddesses. Otherwise, we'll be punished by the gods and die without a burial place. Fong, who was leaning against the pillar, curled his lips. What *t divine punishment, that could make people die without a burial place, that was called divine punishment. Su Jing looked at him and said lightly, Envoy Fong of the right betrayed us and wanted to harm the concubines. You are also guilty. Although the concubines don't want to blame you, if you continue to be stubborn, don't blame me for not being polite. There's no point in saying more. We will not interfere in the affairs of the two concubines, the man said lightly and closed his eyes again. Su Jing clenched his fists tightly, but he quickly relaxed them. Although the believers of the two countries had already accepted the fact that there were two concubines in the holy religion, and the believers of the Jing kingdom had all been subdued by him, it was not easy for the people of the Qi kingdom to determine who was superior between the two concubines. The concubines have arrived. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from outside the hall. In the hall, after a brief silence, everyone stood up from the ground. A young woman appeared at the door of the hall. All the believers of the holy religion knew that the Empress had two incarnations in the human world, and they also remembered the portraits of the two concubines in their hearts. The woman standing outside the door was one of the concubines, the one who represented benevolence. Greetings, concubine. Under the lead of the leader, everyone bowed to the woman at the door. No need to stand on ceremony, the woman said softly. Thank you, concubine. They looked up and saw a rainbow-colored ray of light behind the concubine. It wasn't just one, but several, dozens. The Empress was draped in rainbows, and behind her were countless rays of light. Like a goddess, Wanru appeared in front of them. Inside the hall, all the believers were dumbfounded. Old Fong froze on the spot, pursed his lips, nudged Su Jing, who was standing on the side, and asked, "That, your other queen, can she glow?" "Greetings, concubine." Su Jing didn't answer him, instead kneeling down on both knees, prostrating himself on the ground, and loudly said, "Greetings, concubine." All the believers in the hall knelt down at the same time, prostrating themselves on the ground. This was the highest form of etiquette of the holy religion. Just now, they were greeting the incarnation of the Empress Benevolence. Now, they were greeting the real Empress. And the reason why they could distinguish whether the concubine in front of them was the concubine or her incarnation was because the concubine's incarnation didn't glow, nor did it emit rainbow-colored rays of light. This was the arrival of the Empress herself. Chapter 1030. Ruoqing was like an immortal. She came in a rainbow and left in a rainbow. With a wave of her sleeves, she didn't take away a single cloud, but she took away the faith of many believers. Ruoqing took away their faith, and Su Jing took away their bodies. These were the first batch of believers of the Qi kingdom that they had subdued, and they were the core elites of the holy religion in the Qi kingdom. These elites all prostrated before Xiao Chui's prism. Li Yi had always felt that compared to all kinds of people in the world, these fanatics were the simplest and purest. They wouldn't scheme against each other, and dealing with them wasn't tiring at all. They only believed in Her Majesty. If Her Majesty wanted them to do evil, they would do evil. If Her Majesty wanted them to do good, they would do good. If they could be guided and purified, compared to the filthy and chaotic court, they would be a clean stream in the world. Xiao Chui put away her prism, picked up the mirror in the water, and took away the basin of water in the courtyard. For high-level players, these things and 2 assistants were enough to give people a feast for the eyes. After the matter was done, she would leave in a flash, hiding her achievements and fame. Of course, she didn't really leave in a flash. She just went to the mall with Xiao Zhu and Xiao Huan. Today, they could bring back everything that they could bring back. Li Yi felt that it was necessary to discuss with Ruoqing and give her the title of Rainbow Saintess. Not to mention other things, just her ability of rainbow and daylight was enough for her to establish her own faction. After today, the historical problems of Shu province were almost all solved. Li Yi could wait for his 2, 3 Xiaonyang sons to marry into his family. Thinking about it carefully, there didn't seem to be a big enough bed at home. Today, he would ask Uncle Han to make one for him, in the depths of the land of Bedlam, somewhere deep in the mountains. 3 wretched figures came out of the woods. When they stood on a wide mountain road, they couldn't help but burst into laughter. These 3 people were naturally the right custodian of the holy religion, Fang Yu, and the 2 purple-clothed messengers. Since that night, they had been on the run for more than a month. That day, they were chased by dozens of experts. They only cared about running for their lives and lost their direction. They wandered around the mountains like headless flies, eating and sleeping in the open, cutting their way through brambles and thorns, and finally found the right path. They had suffered quite a lot along the way. At that moment, Fang Yu's clothes had been torn into rags, his face was covered in dirt, and his hair was stuck together. The 2 purple-robed envoys beside him were not in a better condition, and even appeared to be in a worse state. One looked at him, and asked in a hoarse voice, "Guardian, where are we going now?" "Although it is wrong," Fang Custodian, and said. Fang Yu looked ahead, gritted his teeth and said, "Let's go to Qi Kingdom first and meet up with Her Highness. When we're done with Qi Kingdom, we'll come back and kill Li Yi and those baldies." This time, he fell into the baldies' trap. Not only did he fail to capture Li Yi, but he also almost lost his life. The elites of the holy religion under his command would not have a good ending if they fell into the baldies' hands. With such a huge loss, he even lost his base in the land of Bedlam. When he returned to the Qi Kingdom, he would most likely be punished by Saintess. But, he didn't have to worry too much. Blood was thicker than water. No matter how angry Saintess was, she wouldn't do anything to him. But he couldn't swallow the anger in his heart. If things in the Chi Kingdom could proceed smoothly, such a small loss would not be a big deal. He heaved a long sigh of relief. As long as Saintess was there, everything would be fine. He really didn't want to face Li Yi alone. The most important thing now was to find a few suitable clothes. The three of you, stop. A loud and clear voice suddenly came from behind. A few figures quickly rushed out of the forest and surrounded them. The fierce-looking man who led the group looked at them and said, "This is a robbery. Hand over all your valuables. If I'm in a good mood, I might let you go." As he spoke, his voice trailed off. Because the three people before him were really too shabby, their faces were covered in dirt. Not to mention that they hadn't washed their faces for a long time, their clothes had long been torn into rags. They couldn't even cover their crotch. He really couldn't figure out where else they could hide their valuables. The fierce man looked at them, waved his hand impatiently, and said, "Forget it, I'm unlucky to have met you three paupers. It's really unlucky. I'll let you go today. Get out of here." Fong Yu didn't leave. He was staring at the leader's bald head in a daze. When he saw this bald head, Wang Wei's hateful face would appear in his mind. Since more than a month ago, what he hated the most in his heart had changed from wasting food to bald heads. The fierce-looking man looked at them and asked, "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear what I said?" Fong Yu looked at him again and the corner of his mouth twitched. Bald head, this was already the territory of the Qi Kingdom. No matter how fast those bald heads were, they couldn't have come here. So the bald head in front of him was definitely not the bald head he hated. But they were all bald. For some reason, the fierce-looking bald man suddenly felt cold all over and inexplicably shivered. Fong Yu and the two purple-robed envoys began to walk in the direction of those people. "What do you want? You're courting death. Why are you taking off my clothes? Don't, big brother, you're a hero. You can have the socks, but can you leave a crotch cloth? It's cold, leave a pair of pants for me to wear. I beg you, big brother." After only a quarter of an hour, the mountain path was littered with the bodies of the three people, but there was no sign of them. The leader of the bald men had long been beaten black and blue and his face was swollen beyond recognition. He lay limp on the ground, his body twitching unconsciously. Although the others did not suffer the same torture as him, there were three of them who were naked from head to toe. They didn't even have a crotch cloth. They squatted down, crossed their arms, and looked at their companions beside them, shivering. "Borrow a pair of pants to wear, we're all brothers, don't be so stingy. If you don't have pants, socks will do." The capital city. The king of Shu was captured by Jiang of Silla in Shuzhou and was now secretly escorted to the capital city. Apart from the royal family and some high-ranking officials in the court, the people and officials in the capital city were still in the dark about this matter. After all, the matter of the Chui clan was no small matter. It was equivalent to treason. Although this matter had passed for a long time, it was related to the royal family. Once the king of Shu returned, it would definitely become the focus of the people and officials in the capital city. At the gate of the palace, a eunuch who had already received the news stood quietly and waited. He didn't know when, but a carriage appeared in front of him. The carriage came from afar and slowly stopped. The carriage looked very shabby. Obviously, it had been traveling for a long time. A young man jumped out of the carriage and lifted the curtain, showing it to a eunuch in the palace. The eunuch asked, "Look, is this the king of Shu?" The eunuch looked at it carefully and compared it with the portrait in his hand. He nodded and said, "Without a doubt, it is the king of Shu. It's good that it is the king of Shu." The young man took the book and pen and handed it to the eunuch. He said, "If there is no problem with the goods, please sign here." Thank you for your hard work, brother. The eunuch cupped his hands and said with a smile. In order to deceive the public, it was not a courier who secretly escorted the king of Shu from Shuzhou to the capital city, but an armed escort. This Shunfeng escort agency had just been established, but its branches had already spread across all the provinces and prefectures of the Jing kingdom. Whether it was delivering letters or goods, the speed of logistics was only inferior to the speed of the imperial court's express delivery. Moreover, it was very credible and rarely made mistakes. Although it was more expensive, it was still very popular among the people and merchants. The eunuch was already familiar with this. He took the pen and paper and said, "Please wait here for a moment. I will bring it back to His Majesty and have him sign it." Chapter 1031. Not long after, in the Hall of Diligent Government, Li Xian, who had just returned from the Academy of Sciences, signed a piece of paper and asked, "Where is the king of Shu now?" The eunuch replied, "The princess has temporarily sent him to Jinghe Palace." Li Xian walked out of the hall and walked into a palace. He stood side by side with Emingsu. The king of Shu was not the real king of Shu, but this news could not be spread out. Otherwise, it would damage his father's reputation. Even his return to the capital had to be done quietly so as not to attract the attention of the people and officials. This was the reason why Li Yi chose to secretly send the king of Shu back without fanfare. Inside the hall, the king of Shu looked at the eunuchs and palace maids in front of him and laughed. "I thought that Li Yi was here to steal my throne. It turns out that he wants to send me back." He pointed to the people in front of him and said, "Slaves, why don't you kneel when you see me?" The eunuchs and palace maids lowered their heads and did not dare to speak. He walked around the hall and saw Li Xian and Emingsu standing at the door. He pointed at them and asked, "Li Xian, Emingsu, why don't you bow to me when you see me? Have you forgotten the rules I taught you?" Li Xian looked at him and turned to ask, "Are you crazy?" Emingsu shook her head. "I don't know." Li Xian thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Forget it, it's not important." He looked behind him and said to a eunuch, "Someone, bring wine." "Yes, Your Majesty." Soon, a eunuch came out with an exquisite wine pot. Li Xian poured a cup of wine and handed it to the king of Shu. He said lightly, "Drink it." The king of Shu was stunned and shook his head violently. "I don't drink. Drinking will cause trouble. I don't drink. I like to drink grape wine." Li Xian thought for a moment and turned back. "Bring me grape wine." The king of Shu was clearly taken aback. Then, he shook his head and said, "I don't drink grape wine. I want to drink water." "Water is good for the body." Li Xian asked the eunuch to bring 3 cups to the king of Shu. He pointed to the tray and said, "This cup is wine, this cup is grape wine, and this cup is water. There must be one that you like, right? I don't drink wine, nor do I drink grape wine, nor do I drink water." The king of Shu suddenly waved his hand and knocked the tray over. He stretched out his hands and began to run in the hall. As he ran, he shouted, "I am the Son of Heaven, I am the God of Heaven. I don't need to eat, I don't need to drink. I can absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth and the essence of the sun and moon." Li Xian looked at the eunuchs and palace maids beside him and said, "You can leave first." Yes, the few of them quickly retreated and closed the door. Only then did Li Xian look at the king of Shu who was letting loose in the hall. He asked, "Are you done acting?" "Aye, if you say another word, I won't let them send you food or water in the future. Anyway, you can absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth and the essence of the sun and moon. You won't starve to death." The king of Shu stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at them. He smiled bitterly and said, "You've won, you've won. You've won the world, won the hearts of the people, won everything. Let me go, let me go, I don't want to die, I don't want to die." Li Xian looked at him and asked, who wants you to die. The king of Shu pointed to the mess on the ground and said repeatedly, poisoned wine, you want me to drink poisoned wine. Li Xian took out the wine pot from another tray, took a sip, poured a cup of grape wine, and drank it in one gulp. Finally, he rinsed his mouth with water from another pot, looked at the king of Shu, and said, long time no see. I'm just treating you to a cup of wine. Why are you so nervous? The king of Shu collapsed to the ground and looked at Li Xian in despair. He asked, Li Xian, what grudge do you have against me? You stole my princess and my throne, and now you want to treat me like this. Have you forgotten? Li Xian looked at him and said fiercely, how can you forget? Have you forgotten that you bullied me when I was a child? You bullied me so badly. At that time, I thought, don't fall into my hands in the future. Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the palace and said to the 2 imperial guards at the door, from today on, seal up Jinghe Palace. He is not allowed to step out. Except for food and water every day, no one is allowed to enter. Yes, Your Majesty. When he walked back, Li Xian turned to look at Mingzu and asked, is there anything wrong with dealing with him like this? Mingzu did not speak, which meant that she acquiesced. In the blink of an eye, that guy has been gone for almost a year. The last time he sent a letter saying that he was going to get married soon and that he was going to marry 2 wives. It seems to be in the next 2 days. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see it. Li Xian put his hands behind his head, stretched, and said, why don't we go to Shuzhou to see the suffering of the people and have a nuptial night? But it may be too late. Before he finished speaking, he felt that it was inappropriate. He turned to look at Mingzu and immediately changed the topic, let's not talk about this. Mingzu, look, how blue the sky is today, and how white the clouds are. As he spoke, his voice became lower. He looked at her in confusion, pointed to her hair, and asked, what's wrong with your hair? It seems to be missing. It's nothing. She covered the strand of hair with her hand and said, I accidentally cut it when I was practicing swordsmanship. Looking at Mingzu, who left in a hurry, Li Xian shook his head and said, when you practice swordsmanship, you should tie up your hair. Speaking of hair, he lowered his head and touched a sachet on his waist. There were 2 strands of hair in it, one was hers, and the other was Susu's. He suddenly looked up at the direction in which Mingzu had left, and a look of realization appeared on his face. He murmured, has it come to this? According to the customs of the Jing kingdom, the wedding was divided into 6 steps, accepting gifts, asking for names, accepting gifts, asking for dates, and welcoming in person. But when it came to Li Yi, everything was simple. Ruoqing and Zui Mo were already a family. It was not known whether Rui could be counted as a second marriage. They were just married from one yard to another. The journey to Shuzhou was long, and it was difficult for the old lady to bear the long journey. From the few words in the letter, one could see the old lady's regret. As the governor of the capital and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Tsing Shichen was busy with official affairs. It was impossible for him to leave the capital for several months, so he sent gifts and letters very early. Ruoqing became an orphan at a very young age and grew up in a brothel. She had no relatives, so many customs and steps of the wedding could be skipped directly. Of course, it was impossible for the 4 of them to not have an elder. Second uncle sat at the front with his eyes half closed. After receiving their greetings, he lowered his head and let out a light snore. Tonight, the Jiang of Sila's mansion was particularly lively. Li Yi did not make a big fuss at the wedding. Everything was carried out in the mansion in a low-key manner. Although the people and officials of Shuzhou had known the news a long time ago, they did not know that the day of His Highness Jiang of Sila's wedding was today. Of course, even so, there were a lot of guests in the mansion. There were people from the Lu League, people from the brothel, the bald group led by Wang Wei, and people from the Willow Leaf Village who had gone through thick and thin together from the beginning. Tonight, there was no prince or son-in-law, only men and wine. Li Yi raised his wine cup, raised his head frequently, and drank up all the wine in the cup. Fortunately, he was good at drinking, so he would not get drunk after 2 or 3 cups. Moreover, in order not to delay the wedding night, his wine was made by Xiao Zhu herself. There was a strong smell of wine, but in fact, the alcohol content was not high, only a little higher than grape wine, so it was not easy to get drunk. Xiao Zhu decided to carry forward her bartending business, and Li Yi strongly supported her. He just promised her that he would open a tavern in Yong County in a few days and let her be the proprietress. He did not know whether her tears were because of this or because she was reluctant to see her miss get married. Maybe the latter reason was more, because Xiao Cui, who was with her, also had tears in her eyes. This was a little strange. The wedding with Ruoqing and Zumo was just a ceremony. They would be the same as before, so why were they crying? What was more strange was that Xiao Huan also cried, and she cried even more sadly than them. Her tears could not be stopped. She was already an 18-year-old girl, but why did she still cry like a little girl? Chapter 1032. Tonight, the Jiang of Silla residence was filled with jubilation. Wang Wei had drunk a lot that night. His face was red and he couldn't even speak properly. He only knew how to raise his glass and said, "Come, come, come, Your Highness, drink." Fang rubbed his bald head and glared at him. He said, "What are you drinking for? If you want to drink, go home with your wife. Didn't you see how much the son-in-law drank tonight?" Wang Wei pushed him away. His eyes were drunk and blurred. He said, "No, this glass of wine. I must toast Your Highness with this glass of wine. My life was given by Your Highness and big sister. I can get to where I am today thanks to Your Highness' trust. I have no regrets in this life if I can work for Your Highness." Fang carried him to a bald woman and said, "Sister-in-law, I'll leave this guy to you. In the future, persuade him to drink less. He won't be able to control himself if he drinks too much. Just now, I saw him groping a little girl who was serving wine. He wanted the little girl to be his concubine. The little girl was so anxious that she cried." "Got it." The bald woman nodded. She held Wang Wei's neck with one hand and looked at him coldly. Fang looked at the time and walked to the front. He said loudly, "It's getting late. Everyone should have eaten and drunk enough. Let's go, a drunk man said in a daze. "Hey, it's still early. We haven't consummated our marriage." Fang kicked his butt and said angrily, "Get out, get out. If you've drunk enough, get out. Don't cause trouble here." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If they want to drink, let them continue to drink. There's enough wine today. They can drink as much as they want." Fang looked back and nodded. "Then let them drink here. I'll help son-in-law to rest, no need." Li Yi waved his hand. "I'm not drunk yet. I can walk by myself." His body swayed, and he walked outside alone. Fang followed behind and watched him walk into a courtyard. Then he turned and left. Li Yi closed the door and blocked out all the noise outside. The whole world suddenly became quiet. Several rooms in the courtyard were lit up. Li Yi took a few steps forward. When he was about to step on the stairs, he suddenly didn't know which one to push. He stood where he was and thought for a moment. Then, he stretched out his finger and muttered, "Pick an army, pick a general, pick a wife. Whoever little rooster points at will be the one." Li Yi's finger moved slowly, and he nodded every time he pointed. When he said, "Who?" for the second time, his finger pointed at the room on the far left. The room on the far right belonged to Rui. From right to left, it was Ruoqing, Zuamo, and Rui. Today was their wedding night. It was not good to choose between Rui, Ruoqing, and Zuamo. It was unrealistic to choose all of them, so they could only follow God's will. Li Yi walked up the stairs to the door of the leftmost room. Halfway there, he stopped. Rui, God's will told him to choose Rui, but he didn't dare to. He knew which one he couldn't afford to offend, God's will or Rui. So this time, he had to go against God's will. He stretched out his finger again and changed the direction. He nodded and said, "Whoever little rooster points at will be the one." His finger still stopped at the room on the far left. Li put down his finger and thought to himself, would there be retribution for disobeying God's will twice in a row? Disobeying might not necessarily happen, but not disobeying it would happen immediately. Li excluded Rui's room and chose a new one. This time, he could finally follow God's will. He walked to the door of Rui's room and knocked on the door. The candlelight in the room that was still lit a moment ago was extinguished in the next moment. Rui's voice came from inside. "Tonight, I will sleep with Xiao Huan. Husband, go find little sisters Ruoqing and Zuamo." Although he didn't want to disobey God's will, Li Yi had no choice but to give up after knocking a few times and there was no response. He knew why Rui did this, and he was a little touched. There was only one Rui in the world, and it was his Rui. He didn't save the world in his previous life, and he was kicked because he was willing to help others. This must be God's compensation for him. As for that bastard who returned kindness with enmity, he couldn't take revenge for this kick in this life, but in the next life, he would harm his daughter and let him get what he wanted. Li Yi walked to the door of Ruoqing's room and knocked on the door. This time, the candlelight in the room was extinguished after a while. Ruoqing stood on the opposite side of the door and said to him, "Tonight I will sleep with Xiao Zhu. You go find Sister Rui and Zuamo." There weren't many women as sensible as Rui, and with the addition of Ruoqing, God's compensation for him was too great. It could be seen how much that guy hurt him. In the next life, if it was not enough to have sex with one daughter, he would at least have sex with two. Li Yi stood outside Ruoqing's door for a while before walking to the door of Zuamo's. His footsteps stopped, and the candlelight in the room went out. Li Yi was startled and asked, "Do you want to say that you want to sleep with Xiao Chui tonight and ask me to find Rui and Ruoqing?" Not saying anything was a tacit agreement. Li Yi knew that Zuamo was just a door away, and whispered, "Don't make trouble, I'm not making trouble." Zuamo leaned against the door and whispered, "Anyway, tonight, you can't find me." Li Yi understood what she meant, and he also understood what Rui and Ruoqing meant. However, what was wrong with sleeping with Xiao Huan, Xiao Zhu, and Xiao Chui? The bed was a new big bed, and it was not crowded for 3 people. He had 3 beautiful wives, but he could only stay alone. This was one of the saddest things in life. On the wedding night, where to sleep at night was actually a problem. There was no bed in the study. Should he squeeze with Fong? He sat on the steps, leaning against the pillar, drowsy. Although the wine he drank at night was specially made by Xiao Zhu, it was still wine after all. After drinking too much, he still felt a little dizzy. But what Rui and the others did, the cold wind at night, and the cold stone steps, made his heart and body cold, and his buttocks cold, and he couldn't sleep. He shivered slightly, and a fragrant wind blew, and suddenly he felt a lot warmer. Because he had a piece of clothing on his shoulders. "It's cold outside, come in," Mississippi Lu said lightly, turned around and walked into the room. On the wedding night, he was locked out by his wife, and was seen by his sister-in-law. This made Li Yi blush a little. This was really embarrassing. He was already familiar with Mississippi Lu's room, even more familiar than his own room. This room carried many painful memories that he didn't want to recall. Li Yi wrapped his clothes tightly, and when he stepped into the room, he seemed to hear the sound of smacking echoing in his ears. Mississippi Lu poured a cup of hot tea for him, and sat across from him, minding her own business. Li Yi drank a cup of tea, and then he realized that there was not only tea on the table, but also wine and dishes. Grumble, his stomach began to growl in disappointment. Just now, it was only at the beginning, and then he only cared about drinking. Now that he smelled the aroma, he felt unbearably hungry. He licked his lips, picked up the chopsticks on the table, and began to wolf down the food. Mississippi Lou glanced at him and reminded him, "These are my chopsticks." Lee curled his lips and said, "Don't be so stingy. If you want to eat, then get another pair. We're a family, why bother about these things?" Mississippi Lou reminded him again, "Those are the chopsticks I used just now." Okay, I'll give them back to you." Lee took a few more mouthfuls of food, returned the chopsticks to her, and said, "Then get me a new pair." Mississippi Lou took a new pair of chopsticks, but it was not for Lee, and she ate while drinking. Women were really strange creatures. One moment they wanted it, the next moment they didn't. Lee shook his head and poured himself a cup. Tonight, in order not to affect the wedding night, Lee asked Xiao Zhu to make a few pots of wine for him. Now that the wedding night was over, he should drink to his heart's content on this big day. He looked at Rui opposite him, and thought to himself, God's will is God's will. After going around in a big circle, in the end, he still had to spend the wedding night with Rui. On both sides of the square table, one was dressed in white, and the other was dressed in red, but there seemed to be no conflict between them. The atmosphere was extremely harmonious, as if everything was supposed to be like this. Once you drink too much, you can't control your mouth. What's more, today was a good day. Once people had a good life, they would always think about better things. It was better to add flowers to a brocade than to add snow to snow. Lee looked at Rui and suddenly said, "Rui, let's discuss something." Mississippi Lou looked up at him and asked, "What is it?" Lee thought for a moment and said, "In the future, can you be gentler to me? Don't spank my butt anymore." Mississippi Lou thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "Then will you still be so naughty in the future?" Chapter 1033. Lee looked at Mississippi Lou with a troubled expression and said, I'll try my best." Mississippi Lou nodded and said, "Then I'll try my best too." "You can't try your best." Lee drank another glass of wine to boost his courage and said, "You see, I'm a prince now, and I have so many people under me. I also want my face. If you keep hitting me like this and others see it, how can I show my authority?" Mississippi Lou didn't say anything. She just looked at the wedding robe draped over his shoulder. The red was a little dazzling. She smiled and nodded, "Okay. Then it's a deal." Lee's face lit up with joy and stretched out his finger, "Pinky swear." "Childish," Mississippi Lou glanced at him, then stretched out her little finger and hooked it together with her thumb. "That's a deal. If you go back on your word, you'll suffer retribution. Be careful that you won't be able to marry for the rest of your life." Lee was overjoyed. He filled her cup with wine and said, "Drink. Let's drink to our vow. This glass is for today's big day. This glass is for capturing me up the mountain. This glass is for the king of bandits." Lee didn't know how much Mississippi Lou could drink. He only remembered that at the beginning, she would get drunk and blush when she drank the tasteless liquor. That was the only time he saw her drunk. Today was the second time. Lee didn't know what time it was. The dishes were gone, and the table was filled with empty wine jars. Lee felt like the world was spinning around him, but he refilled their glasses out of habit. He put his hand on her shoulder and said, "This cup is for you being a man." Mississippi Lou's eyes were blurred. She waved her hand and said, "No, I'll be drunk if I drink anymore." "It's okay, you can't drink, I'll drink for you." Lee drank both glasses of wine. Mississippi Lou's cheeks were red, and she frowned, "I can't drink." "What a joke, bring the wine." "There's no more." Lee took a few empty wine jars and shook his head. He put the wine jars back and turned around. He found Mississippi Lou sitting at the table, holding her cheek with one hand and looking at him with blurred eyes. Lee was startled and said, "I'll be embarrassed if you look at me like this." She looked for a long time and suddenly said, "Let me ask you a question." Li Yi sat down beside her and asked, "What is it?" "Who's prettier, Mingzu Li and Li?" "You too." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I don't know who's prettier, you don't know." Lady Lu's voice rose a pitch. "It's okay." Li Yi waved his hand, patted her chest, and said, "Although the two of you are about the same beauty, your breasts are bigger than hers. She definitely won't be able to catch up in this lifetime, it's okay." Li Yi waved his hand. He patted her chest and said, "You asked first." Unexpectedly, Mississippi Lu just waved her hand casually and said, "Forget it." It's not the first time anyway. However, Miss Lu just casually waved her hand and said, "Forget it." It's not the first time anyway. Li Yi looked at her and murmured, "Not the first time." She didn't explain further and picked up a wine pot. However, she didn't pour any wine out. She stood up and walked towards the bed unsteadily, saying, "You can go back. I'm tired. I want to sleep, they don't want you, and I don't want you." Mississippi Lu grabbed his arm and said, "You should go back. I'm sleepy. I want to sleep, they don't want you, and I don't want you." Mississippi Lu grabbed his arm and said, "Get up." Li Yi suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at her and asked, "You don't want me either?" Mississippi Lu stood by the bed and stared at him. After a while, she rolled him to the foot of the bed. "Yes." She lay down beside him and said, "They don't want you, but I want you." She turned around and looked at Li Yi. "I have one more question." Li Yi closed his eyes and murmured, "Why do you have so many questions? Are you asking 100,000 whys? Do you still want to go back? Go back to where? Go back to where you came from." "Yes." Li Yi opened his eyes. His gaze was blurry. He said, "Even in my dreams." Mississippi Lu's eyelashes fluttered. She looked confused and asked, "Don't you want everything here? Don't you want my sister? Don't you want Dwayner? Don't you want Xiao Huan? Don't you want Yongning? Don't you want Mingzu? Don't you want me?" "Yes, I want everything." "Then why do you still want to go back?" "I miss my mother." After a moment of silence, Mississippi Lu stretched out her hand and slapped his butt through the quilt. She said angrily, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Li Yi's hands were rolled up in the quilt. He couldn't move. He squirmed a few times and said, "We just made a pinky promise. You still hit me. Be careful. No one wants you in the future. If no one wants you, then no one wants you." Li Yi suddenly laughed. Don't worry. If no one wants you in the future, don't forget about me, don't forget about you. You don't want me either. You've already used this trick, don't forget about me. I'll support you." Her raised hand fell down again. Her eyelashes fluttered a few times. After a long time, she said slowly, "I'm sleepy." This time, she didn't get any response. She opened her eyes and looked at him in his sleep. There was still a smile on her face. Her breathing gradually calmed down. She just stared. When Li Yi woke up, he found that he had a terrible headache. He thought that Mississippi Lu must have made him drunk again last night. He opened his eyes and wanted to get up from the bed, only to find that he couldn't get up at all. He was rolled up in the quilt. The culprit was sleeping next to him. She was sound asleep and hadn't woken up yet. The person lying next to his pillow was actually Mississippi Lu. This gave Li Yi a fright. But looking at the situation now, they should just be lying on the same bed. Nothing serious happened. Only then did he finally relax. He spent a lot of effort to get out of the quilt. He carefully got off the bed and looked back. Mississippi Lu was still asleep. "What a pig," Li Yi shook his head. When he was about to leave, he suddenly turned around after taking 2 steps. He stared blankly at the figure on the bed. Mississippi Lou. The sleeping Mississippi Lou. The defenseless Mississippi Lou. She slept soundly on her side. Her back was facing Li Yi. A certain perky part of her was facing him. Li Yi's gaze fell on that part of Mississippi Lou's body. A bold idea suddenly popped up in his mind. What goes around comes around. This year, it's my turn. Sooner or later, you'll have to pay for what you've done. Pay them back in their own coin. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. At this moment, he thought of many words from the ancients. The ancients didn't lie to me. Countless painful memories emerged in his heart. Li Yi raised his head and hit her without hesitation. Smack! Li Yi swore that this was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard in his life. All the humiliation he had suffered in the past disappeared in this smack. At this moment, he felt that he had reached the peak of his life. Then he saw Mississippi Lou turn her head and look at him with a pair of deep eyes. The sky was slightly bright. Fong came out of the courtyard. He opened the door and stretched his body. Bang! In the prince's mansion, one of the courtyard doors suddenly shattered. Two figures jumped out one after another. Fong's expression changed. Did assassins break into the residence of eldest miss and second miss? Soon, he dispelled this thought. Because the people who came out one after another were the son-in-law and second Mississippi. The next moment, his expression became even more horrified. Because he realized that the son-in-law was wearing second Miss's clothes early in the morning. Moreover, both of them were barefooted. His body shuddered as he immediately thought of a terrifying possibility. Could it be that the son-in-law was drunk last night and went into the wrong room? On the wedding night, he went into the wrong room and slept on the wrong bed. Or perhaps, he slept with the wrong person. Help! Someone's been killed. He looked in the direction of the scream in a daze and sighed. What a sin. Chapter 1034. Li Yi sat in the yard and spent a long time to calm down. He had once reached the peak of his life. Although it was very short and fleeting, he would always remember the feeling at that time. After being humiliated by Mississippi Lou for so long, at that moment, he finally completed a beautiful counterattack. Of course, it felt good, but the price he paid was painful. He was chased by Mississippi Lou for a few miles. This time, she did not spank his butt again, but directly hit his laughing acupuncture point. When the two of them walked back, she looked at him and smiled all the way. However, it was not without gains. Li Yi still vaguely remembered that before the two of them got drunk last night, he seemed to have reached an agreement with her. She promised him that they would hook up. Although she was still not that gentle to him, at least, she would not do something as shameful and exciting as spanking his butt. This was a great improvement, and it was worth being happy about. The smile on Li Yi's face just appeared on his face, but he immediately stopped. He held his stomach and his face twitched. He laughed for too long in the morning, and now his stomach hurt when he laughed, although he did not know what happened after that, and why he ran to Mississippi Lou's bed. This was not important. Anyway, nothing that should not have happened happened. The only regret was that she finally got drunk yesterday. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it was really a pity that he did not get any secrets from her. The inspiration for this idea came from Mississippi Lou. Last time when he was drunk, she even asked those virtuous and artistic teachers, and said that she already knew all his secrets. She did ask a lot of things, but if he said that he did not have any secrets with her, Li Yi would not believe it. Did she know that he actually came from another world? Did she know why he was always mischievous in front of her? She did not know anything. Xiaohuan walked out of the room and looked at the strange expression on the young master's face. She asked curiously, "Young master, did something happy happen to you this morning?" No. Li Yi would not admit that it was because Mississippi Lou hit his laughing acupuncture point, and he said seriously. Xiao Huan said in disbelief, but young master smiled the whole morning. No means no. Okay. Xiao Huan did not ask about this matter, and asked again, then where did young master sleep last night? Last night. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, I slept with Fang. Xiao Huan looked at Fang, who came in from outside the door, and asked, Uncle Fang, right? Old Fang was taken aback. He looked at Li Yi, then at Xiao Huan, and nodded. Yes, that's right. Xiao Huan looked at Fang and said, I haven't asked, Uncle, what you said, yes. Old Fang looked left and right, then clasped his hands behind his back and walked away. Who sent you to my side? Uncle Fang, he. Li Yi stared at her and said, Who sent you to my side, Uncle Fang, he. Li Yi glared at her and said, What's there to ask? You didn't open the door for me last night, so I had to squeeze with Fang. Otherwise, where else could I sleep, with the second miss? Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu, who came out of the room, and asked, Don't you think so, Rui? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and walked straight out of the yard without saying anything. Oh. Xiao Huan nodded, looked at the yard door and asked, But young master, why is the yard door broken? Li Yi knocked on her head and said, Why do you have so many questions? Are you 100,000 wise? He was stunned after he said it. This scene and this sentence, why did it have a sense of déjà vu? Xiao Huan covered her head and said, Then I won't ask any more. I'll tell a joke to young master. The second miss asked me to tell more jokes to young master. Li Yi couldn't help shivering and felt a dull pain in his stomach. He covered his ears and said, I won't listen, I won't listen. Xiao Huan hugged his arm and said coquettishly, young master, just listen. I won't listen, then I'll tell my joke. Young master just won't listen. The little servant girl was not obedient. If the soft approach didn't work, he had to use the hard approach. He pressed Xiao Huan on his thigh and spanked her butt. She never mentioned the joke again and ran away with a red face and her butt. Watching her run away, Li Yi sat in the courtyard and let out a long sigh. People say that a moment of the night is worth 1,000 gold, but 1,000 gold can't buy an inch of time. Time flies like an arrow, the sun and moon shuttle. It's all about the preciousness of the wedding night. 1,000 gold can't buy an inch of time. Time flies like a rice dumpling. But the first time he had the wedding night, he was dragged up the mountain by Mississippi Lu and spent it in a daze. That night, he was shocked by Rui breaking the wooden table with her palm. The second time he had the wedding night, he was rolled up like a dumpling and couldn't move. The night of the night was wasted just like that. He must have owed Mississippi Lu a lot of money in his previous life, the kind that even 2,000 gold wouldn't be enough. Rui, Ruoqing and Zumo were really too much. They didn't know when to be modest. Was the wedding night the time to be modest? Kong Rong let them be. This time, not only did he not make up for the regret of the wedding night, but he had even more regrets. Li Yi silently swore in his heart that the next time, the time after that, it must be perfect. Thinking of the next time, the time after that, he was a little happy again, and then his stomach began to hurt again. Mississippi Lu walked in from outside and sat opposite him. When Li Yi saw her, his stomach hurt even more, and he subconsciously became vigilant. He immediately said, What are you trying to do? Don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you're beautiful, and you can go back on your word. You promised me last night. I promised you last night, I won't. Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, I won't spank your butt, and I didn't break my promise. Li Yi thought about it. She didn't break her promise, but her methods were even more ruthless. He really shouldn't have said so much last night. There was a lot of meat on her butt, and it was exciting to be spanked. It's over, it's over. Li Yi quickly dispelled this thought from his mind. After spending so much time with Fang, he felt that he seemed to have been infected by him and had become a masochist. Mississippi Lu thought about it, stared at him, and said, I have a question to ask you. What question do you have again? Li looked at her and asked warily, then his expression froze. Why did he say, again? Mississippi Lu rubbed the space between her eyebrows, stared at him, and asked, other than this, did it say anything else to you last night? No, right? Li actually didn't know. He really forgot. Even Rui Lu, the always drunk, had forgotten everything after getting drunk. How could she expect him to remember? Wasn't she thinking too highly of him? Mississippi Lu looked at his expression and asked again, you really don't remember? Li shook his head, I don't remember. It's better to drink less in the future. It's not good for your health, and it'll make things worse, then it's okay. Mississippi Lu finally felt relieved. She waved her hand, stood up, and left. She felt that he said a very rare truth. Don't be greedy when you drink, because when you're drunk, you don't know what you'll say and what you'll do. She actually asked him who was prettier between her and Emingzu. She actually said, they don't want it, but I want it. She actually asked him the biggest secret that she learned from him that night. She actually slept on the same bed with him for the whole night. Fortunately, he didn't remember any of this. Wait a minute. Li suddenly stood up, and a look of realization appeared on his face. He looked at Mississippi Lu and said, I remember everything. Hearing Li Yi's voice, Mississippi Lu stopped in her tracks. Her body stiffened, and her heart began to beat wildly uncontrollably. She turned around, looked at him, and asked calmly, what did you remember? Her expression was indifferent, and her fists, which were hidden in her sleeves, were clenched tightly. Even she didn't realize that her voice was slightly trembling. Of course, Li didn't realize that Rui's voice was trembling either. In his heart, he gave him 100 thumbs up for his wit. Opportunities always came to those who were prepared. Without a doubt, this was an opportunity. He looked at Mississippi Lu, thought for a moment, and said solemnly, last night, you said that you'll be gentler to me in the future. You won't speak loudly to me, and you won't bully me from time to time. You also said that you'll prepare an expensive gift for me during holidays and birthdays. Also, you said that you'll be nicer to me, that you'll massage my shoulders and back when I'm tired, and cook noodles for me when I'm hungry. Chapter 1035. You have to listen to me in the future. You have to help me when Emingzu bullies me. You can't be on her side. After listening to him for a quarter of an hour, Mississippi Lu closed her eyes and let out a long sigh of relief. She asked, anything else? Of course. You said Emingzu. Mississippi Lu's eyes suddenly opened. A trace of panic flashed across her pretty face. Her heart began to beat wildly again. What happened to Emingzu? You said Emingzu was too much. How could she bully others like that? Li thought for a moment and nodded. He looked at her and said, yes, that's what you said. You said that when we return to the capital, you will personally spank her to avenge me. I promise you that. Mississippi Lu took a deep breath and crossed her arms. She looked at him and asked, anything else? Li thought for a moment and said, yes, but I can't remember it now. We'll talk about it when I remember it. You should do what you promised first. He suddenly felt some admiration for himself, so much so that he prostrated himself in admiration. Anyway, Rui was drunk last night. He didn't remember what happened. It was up to him to make up stories. If he didn't have a little conscience, he would directly tell her that she violated his body last night and ask for more compensation and privileges. Second Lady Lu did not speak. Li looked at her and suddenly asked, you are the chief of the Wulin League. Your words carry enormous weight. What you say is like spilled water. You won't go back on your word, will you? No. Mississippi Lu smiled and shook her head. She said softly, why would I? I'll keep my word. Are you hungry or tired? Let me massage your shoulders first. Do you want to cook a bowl of noodles for you first? Happiness came so suddenly that Li Yi couldn't believe it. He suspected that he was dreaming and that he was still lying on the bed with Mississippi Lu. Let's massage the shoulders first, Li Yi said after some thought. It wasn't until he was lying on the rocking chair with Mississippi Lu's hands roaming around his shoulders that he finally accepted reality. She actually believed it, she really believed it. Li Yi could already imagine the beautiful life in the future. He took a deep breath and said, I didn't use enough strength, use more strength. Mississippi Lu smiled and said, okay. Outside the door, Fong saw with his own eyes that Xiao Huan went out. Only then did he come out from behind a big tree, ready to ask the son-in-law what they were talking about. As a qualified follower, he needed to have this kind of awareness. Even if the son-in-law said that he slept with him last night, he had to convince himself that he wasn't hugging two women last night. It was the son-in-law who was hugging him last night. For the son-in-law, for the young miss, for the second miss, for a perfect family. He felt that he was very great at this moment. Perhaps his back was shining with colorful light like that of Lady Ruoqing. When he walked to the door, he heard screams coming from the yard. You used too much strength. It hurts, it hurts. Be gentle, this was the voice of the son-in-law. I haven't used any strength yet. Just bear with it a little longer. It won't hurt in a while. This was the voice of the second Mississippi. Fong stopped in his tracks and stood there for a while. Then, he turned around and strode away. It's just a joke. Why are you so serious? His bones were almost broken by her. Li Yi rubbed his shoulders and said, I forgot. Tell me, what else did you say last night? Nothing. Mississippi Lu clapped her hands and asked, do you still want to eat noodles? No. Li Yi's attitude was very firm. He almost dismembered himself by rubbing his shoulders. If he asked her to cook another bowl of noodles, he might directly poison himself to death. It was better not to take this risk. In the end, he didn't ask what Mississippi Lu said last night. Rui, Ruoqing, and Zumo disappeared in the morning. He didn't know if it was some custom or something else. Some of the customs of these women, Li Yi didn't know much. Fong walked in from outside and sat opposite him. Looking at him, he sighed and said, Son-in-law, as a man, you have to be responsible for what you do. If you dare to do it but don't dare to take responsibility, you are not a man. Li Yi turned to look at him and asked, responsible? What responsibility? Fong thought for a moment and said, Son-in-law, if you don't want to take responsibility, you can let the second miss take responsibility. It's the same anyway. Before leaving, he patted Li Yi's shoulder and said earnestly, Son-in-law, you are destined to be unable to escape the clutches of the second miss in this life. Be optimistic and accept your fate. Life is like being raped. If you can't resist, then enjoy it to the fullest. This is my shallow opinion in this life. Take your time to understand. Fong always had a deep understanding of life, but he was wrong about one thing. Life was indeed like being raped, but he didn't think of resisting. The architectural style of the Jiang of Silla mansion was from the inside to the outside, from the master to the servant. The innermost courtyard was where the master of the mansion lived. It could be counted as Rui, Ruoqing, Zumo, and himself. Of course, there were also Xiao Huan, Xiao Zhu, and Xiao Chui's rooms. Yongning had the most freedom and could sleep wherever she wanted. There was also a study without a bed. Li Yi thought that he already had Rui and Zumo and Ruoqing, so there was no need to put a bed in the study. Only now did he realize how naive this thought was. If that was really the case, he wouldn't have spent the night with Mississippi Lu. Be careful, just put it in that corner. Fong moved the mattress in alone. Li Yi looked around and picked a corner that was pleasing to the eye. Fong put the bed in place and looked at Li Yi with a strange gaze. In this courtyard, there were eldest Miss, second Miss, Miss Zumo, Miss Ruoqing, Xiao Huan, Xiao Chui, and Xiao Zhu, the 3 servant girls. Son-in-law could sleep in any of the rooms, but he actually wanted to sleep in the study. Son-in-law couldn't be unable, right? At such a young age, how could he? Li Yi looked at him and said seriously, if you look at me like that again, I'll send you to the Wu Kingdom to gather intelligence and come back in a few years. Fong clapped his hands and turned to walk outside. When he reached the door, he poked his head in and said, Son-in-law, remember to eat more chives and kidneys. If you really can't do it, you can also use tigers or deers or something to make wine. Get lost. Fong left. When he left, he didn't forget to close the door. Li Yi soaked his feet and took off his shoes before lying on the bed and wrapping himself in the blanket. From yesterday until now, he hadn't had a good sleep. In the morning, he was chased by Mississippi Lu for a few miles, and on the first day of his wedding, he had to be alone in his room. He didn't have the mood to complain anymore and was overcome by waves of tiredness. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, the door was suddenly pushed open and gently closed. On the bed, Li Yi's eyes suddenly opened. In the middle of the night, who came to his study? A thief. Impossible. Even if he was a grandmaster, he would not be able to sneak in here. Could it be Rui? Or a rapist? Was it Rui who came to pick up flowers? While Li Yi's mind was running wild, the figure had already reached the bed, quietly took off his shoes and climbed onto the bed. Li Yi's eyes widened. Could it be that the rapist was taking the initiative to offer himself? The moonlight shone in from the window, and Li Yi could roughly see the figure. From the shape of the chest, it was not Rui, but Zumo who came to pick up flowers. Chapter 1036. She shut him out on the wedding night, and now she wanted to secretly pick flowers. Li Yi really didn't expect that Zuemo would be so interested in this. Did she really think that she could get on and off his bed as she pleased? He closed his eyes and waited for her to pick flowers. However, after waiting for a long time, the person beside the bed did not move. Just when Li Yi was about to get impatient, he felt that she stood up. Was she going to run away? Li Yi couldn't pretend anymore. He grabbed her hand and dragged her to the bed. Ah! There was a cry of surprise in the room. Li Yi hugged her tightly and said fiercely, "Since you are here, don't leave." Shoo! After she reacted, she immediately looked back and whispered, "I sneaked here, they don't know." Li Yi carried her to the bed and whispered, "What are you doing here, picking flowers?" In response to him was a hot kiss. Li Yi had seen what a passionate Zuemo was like. In the dark night, there was only breathing and 2 gradually hot bodies. Li Yi knew what she was here to do. She was here to make up for the regret of the wedding night and carry out the last step they didn't finish yesterday. Squeak! There was a sound at the door again. Zuemo was startled and immediately lay down inside, hiding in the quilt. Li Yi looked at the figure who quietly closed the door with some surprise. He thought to himself that it couldn't be. 2 flower thieves came in one night. It seemed that he should carefully consider Fong's suggestion just now. The person who sneaked in was easy to recognize. From the way she walked and the hazy figure, it was Ruoqing. When Ruoqing walked to the bed, she saw him sitting on the bed. She was shocked and said after a long time, You haven't slept yet. What do you mean by, me? Li Yi pulled her over and said, "Call me husband." Someone gently pinched his thigh. "Husband," she called out softly, and Li Yi could feel that her body was getting hot. Yesterday, I didn't mean to." Ruoqing was not as passionate as Zuemo. Her voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. She said, tonight, I will come to accompany you. Don't tell Zuemo, or she will laugh at me. Don't worry, I won't laugh. A familiar voice suddenly sounded. Ruoqing was startled. Seeing the figure crawling out from under the blanket, she was startled and then said in panic, Zumo, you, what do you mean by you? You snuck over without telling me. Tomorrow, I'll punish you according to the family rules. Ruoqing hurriedly stood up and said, I'll go first. Li Yi grabbed her wrist and gently pulled, causing her to fall onto the bed again. Li Yi held her slender waist and said softly, it is fate that brought us together. Why don't we stay together? He slept soundly when he had someone by his side. It was just that his arms were a little numb because they were pillowed on each side. When he came out of the study, it was already late in the morning. Fong was working in the yard, moving the stone table and stone bench to a place further away from the swing. When he saw Li Yi, he stopped in his tracks, thought for a moment, and asked, Young master, do you really not need to ask the kitchen to fry another chives? No matter whether others believed it or not, he really just hugged them to sleep last night. Nothing that should have happened did not happen, and nothing that should have happened did not happen. If it was only Zuemo or Ruoqing, the situation would naturally be different. However, the situation last night was special. The two women did not even take the first step, and the second step naturally could not be rushed. That was a matter for the future. Even though he knew that if he made some kind of request, they would not refuse, for them, this was something that would be unforgettable for the rest of their lives. He should not be so hasty, however, what old Fong said made sense. After all, it was better to be on the defensive than to be on the defensive. Li Yi thought for a moment and nodded. Let's fry one. Remember to fry them together with the kidney. In the early years of the Jinping era, the number of merchants settling in Suzhou began to increase rapidly. The flow of people in Yong County skyrocketed. The originally sparse streets gradually became lively and prosperous. This series of changes had long changed the people from the initial joy and excitement to numbness. Under the governance of His Highness Jiang of Silla, Suzhou would only get better and better. This was something that they never doubted in their hearts. Ever since the situation in the fringe changed dramatically, the bandits were almost completely eradicated. A smooth trade route was opened up, which was known as the Great Mountain Road. The merchants of the Three Kingdoms also benefited greatly from this. This was a region that was not under the jurisdiction of the Three Kingdoms. However, the fringe also had its own rules: freedom, equality, justice, and the rule of law. The fringe, which used to make people pale at the mere mention of its name, had completely changed in just over a year's time. The public security was good, even better than that of the various prefectures. The name Fringe no longer lived up to its name. The caravans traveling on the Great Mountain Road preferred to call it New World. There were even many large caravans that had set up shops and workshops in the mountains for convenience and safety. Of course, these were built on the foundations of the original towns in the mountains. Before this, no one knew that there was such a paradise in the desolate mountains. In the Jiang of Silla's mansion, Fong leaned on the kitchen door and said, Young master, we've almost cleared the road between the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom. The bandits we encountered along the way, other than those we chased away, have all been subdued. However, there are more hard to deal with near the Wu Kingdom. We don't have enough manpower for the time being, so it's a little troublesome to deal with them head-on. Li Yi was cooking fish, Drunk Mo's favorite steamed fish. When he heard that, he said casually, let's put off the trouble for now. We'll talk about it when we can spare some manpower. Watching the young master carry the steamed fish out, Fong swallowed his saliva and shook his head. Ever since the wedding, the young master had been indulging in the land of love and tenderness all day long. He didn't even care about proper business. The spring night was short, and the sun rose high in the sky. From now on, the Jiang of Silla would never get up. after the steamed fish was done, there was only Mississippi Lou's favorite dish left. Li Yi returned to the kitchen, wondering if he should make himself a dish of stir-fried kidney with chives later to nourish himself. He had been a little too depraved in the past 2 months, even if it wasn't for the sake of becoming a martial arts master to avenge Mingju's letter, for the sake of a happy life in the future, he had to train harder and strengthen his physique. Try this, and this, he couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. Including Mississippi Lou, he picked up a mouthful of food for everyone at the table. Only then did Li Yi begin to eat. Li Yi watched Drunk Emo eat a mouthful of fish, and then her expression became a little strange. He was very clear about his cooking skills. Li Yi picked up a mouthful of fish himself. It tasted very good. He looked at Drunk Emo and asked, "What's wrong, doesn't it suit your taste?" "No," Drunk Emo said. Her face turned pale and she immediately ran away. Before Li Yi could react, the sound of retching came from outside the door. Li Yi looked at Rui and Rui watching and asked, "Is it that bad? I'll go out and see her." Without waiting for them to answer, he immediately ran out. Rui picked up a mouthful of fish and tasted it. A puzzled look appeared on her face. When she looked out the door, she was stunned, and then the expression on her face changed: surprise, disbelief, and a trace of resentment. Outside the door, Drunk Emo leaned against the pillar. Her face was pale and she kept retching, but she didn't vomit anything. Li Yi hurriedly ran over, patted her back gently, and said with concern, "What's wrong?" "I'll call the doctor." She shook her head and said, "It's nothing. I suddenly feel a little uncomfortable. I'll be fine after going back to my room to rest. I'll help you back first." Li Yi helped her back to her room and let her lie on the bed. Then he asked, "Other than feeling nauseous, where else do you feel uncomfortable?" Drunk Emo said softly, "I still feel a little dizzy, nausea, dizziness." Li Yi seemed to think of something. He grabbed her hand and suddenly asked, How long has it been since you last came?" "Which?" Drunk Emo looked at him in confusion. After understanding, her face turned red. She glanced at him and said, "How long has it been since I last came?" "You still don't know." Chapter 1037. Drunken Emo was pregnant. He was not prepared at all, let alone mentally prepared. In the beginning, he and Rui had gone through a lot in order to have a child. The old lady had taken her to worship Buddha many times and prayed many times. The two of them had also done a lot of hard work in private. After so much hard work, they had the current young master of the Li family, Li Duan. But he and Drunken Emo had been married for less than 2 months, and she was already pregnant. Judging from the time, it was very likely that it was the first time. When Li Duan was 1 year old, he and Rui had wanted to have a second child, but from a year ago until now, there had been no results. Therefore, he could understand Rui's happiness and the hidden bitterness in her eyes when she looked at him. Drunken Emo and Ruoqing were only 1 day apart. Li Yi held Ruoqing's hand and asked, "How is it? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Ruoqing asked in confusion, "What do you feel uncomfortable? That is, do you feel dizzy, nauseous, or something like that?" Ruoqing instantly understood what he meant. She blushed and whispered, No. Ruoqing and Drunken Emo were not mentally prepared to have children for the time being. They obviously had time to avoid danger, but there was no absolute safety in this kind of thing. God always liked to joke with him on this kind of thing. Drunken Emo was originally only her treasure, but now she immediately became the treasure of the whole family. As soon as Rui learned the news, she told him that he couldn't sleep with Drunken Emo at night anymore, and arranged 2 more obedient and sensible maids for her. The imperial doctor sent by Li Xian from the palace a long time ago naturally received a lot of money. Second Madame's pregnancy was a great thing for the Holy Family. From the housekeeper to the servants, everyone's monthly allowance this month was doubled. In addition, there was extra money. Even Li Duan knew that he was about to have a younger brother or sister. He ran around the courtyard happily. Ever since he left the capital and Shaorui, not many people could play with him. Drunk Ink was now surrounded by them, and Li Yi wasn't idle either. He had to send someone to inform third young lady Qin of this news. He also had to write a letter to report the good news to the old madam in Jingdou. He also had to send a letter to Tsing Shichen. He also had to write to Li Xian to remind him that even if he couldn't come, he couldn't miss out on a congratulatory gift. After writing a few letters, an hour had passed. When Li Yi walked into the room, Zui Mo was alone by the bed, staring blankly ahead. Li Yi sat down beside her and held her hand with a little force. Drunk Ink leaned on his shoulder and whispered, I'm scared. Li Yi put his arm around her shoulder and lowered his head. I'm here, don't be scared. It's not like you're the one giving birth to the child. Of course you're not scared. Drunk Ink rolled her eyes at him and leaned on his chest. The nervousness on her face faded a little. She blinked and suddenly smiled. Do you think our child will be a boy or a girl? Li Yi stroked her hair and said, if it's a boy, we'll protect you. If it's a girl, I'll protect you and your mother. Drunk Ink leaned lightly on his chest and murmured, you won't protect me. You only know how to bully me. When Rui was pregnant, Li Yi couldn't stay by her side from beginning to end. This had always been his regret. He couldn't make the same mistake a second time. He had already warned Wang Wei not to be impatient about the matter in the fringe. He told him to put aside the major forces that he hadn't subdued in the Wu Kingdom and focus on stabilizing the rear. As for the daily affairs of Shu Province, with Qin Chong around, there was no need to worry. Provincial Governor Chen's ability was unquestionable. When a woman was pregnant, there would be many symptoms, including dizziness, nausea, loss of appetite, and so on. In addition to physical problems, mental problems were more likely to occur. At this time, the company of the other half was especially important. Li Yi would hug her to sleep almost every few nights. From dressing up to eating and sleeping, he wouldn't let anyone else interfere. This made Rui, who had always been gentle and generous, a little jealous. One night, after washing up, she leaned on the bed and said in a slightly sour tone, "Husband is so good to Sister Drunk Ink. I'm a little envious of her." Actually, Li Yi had always treated them equally. It was impossible for him to treat them equally. But if he asked himself, he had never been partial to one person. Now that Drunk Ink was in a special period, there was no difference between how Li Yi treated her and how he treated Rui at that time. He knew that Rui was just joking. He pulled her over and said, "What's there to be envious of? When my wife gets pregnant, they'll be the ones envious of you." Rui sighed and said, "How good would it be if I hadn't broken through to the Grandmaster level? It's okay." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Grandmasters aren't cabbages that you can pick and choose from. At most, we'll just try a few more times." "How do we try?" Li Yi waved his hand to turn off the light. He leaned over to her ear and whispered, "Just like this." The light in the room dimmed, and the enchanting scenery in the dark couldn't be seen. Late at night, in a few rooms in the small courtyard, Ruoqing and Drunk Ink had already fallen asleep. 2 rooms away, Mississippi Lu was lying on the bed when her eyes suddenly opened. In the dark, a blush quickly appeared on her face, and she quickly covered her ears with her hands. She covered her ears and covered her head in the quilt. The suppressed and extremely low voice could no longer be heard, but she felt a little hot. She tossed and turned on the bed and couldn't fall asleep. Each room had a separate shower. After taking a shower, Li Yi carried Rui back to the bed and suddenly thought of a problem. He looked next door, then looked at Rui and asked, "Do you think they can hear us just now?" "Don't worry." Rui shook her head and said, "The 2 younger sisters are already asleep." Li Yi looked at her and only felt that a grandmaster was really powerful. It was simply a human-shaped eavesdropping device. He had to experience this feeling in this life, then he realized one thing. Rui seemed to be only one step away from this realm. He looked at Rui and asked, "What about Rui? Can she also hear us?" This time, Rui didn't say anything. Not speaking was a tacit agreement. He thought about it and asked Rui in a low voice, "Do you think it's a little inconvenient for Rui to live here?" Rui closed her eyes and said softly, "What do you want to say? Go and talk to Rui yourself." If he went to talk to Rui, he would be courting death. Li Yi was not that stupid. Maybe Mississippi Lu went to bed very early every night. He closed his eyes and prepared to sleep. After a while, he opened his eyes again and turned to look at Rui. He asked, "My wife can hear from so far away. Do you remember on the night of our wedding, when Rui and I were drunk in her room? What did she say to me? Anyway, they didn't do anything out of line that day." Rui knew about it. Li Yi also just realized that Mississippi Lu didn't tell him what happened that night, but Rui probably knew. Rui thought about it and said, "She made a promise with you that she wouldn't spank you anymore." And then Li Yi was refreshed. He then asked, "I know this. What else did she say?" And then, after a while, Rui said, "Then I fell asleep." What else did she say? You can only ask Rui herself. Li Yi felt a little regretful. If Mississippi Lu remembered it herself, he wouldn't have to ask Rui. He held Rui's hand and whispered, "Let's sleep," Rui responded. After a long time, she asked, "Do you know how old Rui is this year?" "Soon to be 20. Li Yi opened his eyes and said, "In a few years, it'll be time for me to get married. I don't know which good man will get lucky." Chapter 1038. Mississippi Lu was almost 20 years old. Before Rui went to bed last night, she unintentionally asked this question. Li Yi then realized how fast time had passed. When she was riding on the horse and looking down at him, in his eyes, she was only equivalent to a young girl in her prime in the future. Perhaps there was a little rebellion and violence in adolescence. Of course, as she gradually grew up and matured, there was only violence left now. A 20-year-old girl, whether in the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom, or the Wu Kingdom, was definitely an old leftover woman. Even though the marriage law in the Jing Kingdom had been reformed a few years ago and was ahead of the other countries, it only delayed the marriageable age by a few years. According to the statistics of the Ministry of Revenue, the average age of marriage for a girl in the Jing Kingdom was 16 to 17 years old. Of course, this age could not be compared to the future, but compared to the Wu Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom, it was much more scientific. According to this data, not only Mississippi Lu, even Xiao Huan, Xiao Zhu, and Xiao Chui were left behind. However, Mississippi Lu should not care about other people's opinions. After all, she was a woman who wanted to be the king of the mountain bandits. Now that this dream had not been realized, as a heroine and the future king of the mountain bandits, how could she give up her dream because of a romantic relationship? However, what if Rui did not think so? What if she cared about other people's opinions? What if she felt that a man and a woman should get married when they are of age? What if she felt that a romantic relationship was the most important thing? A girl's mind was the most difficult to guess. Sometimes, Li Yi could not even guess what Yongning was thinking, let alone Rui. He had to find a chance to ask her, otherwise he would not be able to put his mind at ease. When a girl grew up, it was indeed worrisome. Mississippi Lu woke up late today, even later than Li Yi. Moreover, his complexion did not look too good. Li Yi sat in the courtyard and looked at her. He asked with concern, "What's wrong? Did you not sleep well last night?" Mississippi Lu glared at him and didn't say anything. She continued her morning exercise in the courtyard. The morning exercise was actually Tai Chi that Rui had modified. Rui had now reached a bottleneck in martial arts. In Sue's words, diligent practice was no longer helpful for her to improve her realm. What she needed was an opportunity. Li Yi didn't know much about opportunities. He only knew that practicing martial arts was like rowing a boat against the current. If you didn't advance, you would fall behind. If Rui didn't advance, he would advance, which was equivalent to Rui falling behind. As long as she stood still, he would catch up to her sooner or later. At that time, it was possible for him to surpass her in terms of martial arts, and then he could, an expert was indeed an expert. His morning exercise was like a dance. The whole set of movements was very pleasing to the eye. After a quarter of an hour, Rui's morning exercise was over. Li Yi placed the heated breakfast on the table. She washed her hands and walked over. Li Yi sat opposite her and watched her eat. Rui usually didn't take the initiative to speak, so Li Yi had to find a topic himself. Li Yi looked at her slightly haggard face and asked, "You always look pale in the morning. Is it because you're not used to living here? Do you want me to move you to another courtyard?" Mississippi Lu took a small sip of porridge and looked up at him. There was a hint of inexplicable meaning in her eyes. Li Yi couldn't help but feel a little guilty when he saw that look. Worried that she would misunderstand something, Li Yi hurriedly explained, "Of course, if you think it's okay to live here, just pretend I didn't say anything. I'm not chasing you away, and I'm not saying you're unnecessary." Mississippi Lu ignored him and buried her head in her porridge. Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, "Rui, you'll be 20 in a few days, right? And then?" Miss Lu glanced at him again and said casually. It was obvious that she was waiting for his next words. "I don't mean anything else." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I just suddenly remembered that when Rui was 20, Dwainer was already born. You're not young anymore. When are you going to get married? Do you have any plans?" Guessing other people's thoughts was not a good thing. Li Yi decided to ask in a roundabout way. After getting an answer from Mississippi Lu, he felt a little more confident. Without waiting for Mississippi Lu to answer, he immediately said, "Of course, I feel that although family is important, a girl should still prioritize her career. You have Lu Mang in your hand and you're in charge of the fringe. You don't have to rush into getting married. Rui and I can support you." Mississippi Lu put down her bowl and wiped her mouth with a napkin. Then, she looked straight at him. This made Li Yi feel even more guilty. After some time, Mississippi Lu suddenly retracted her gaze and said, "You're right. I'm already 20. If I don't hurry to get married, I'll be like Li Emingzu in a few years. No one wants me." Li Yi looked at her and murmured, "Emingzu, she has someone who wants her." "What?" "Nothing." Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, "I don't want to be like Li Emingzu. Moreover, I have my own hands and feet. I don't need you and my sister to support me." Then, she looked at Li Yi and said, "Also, I forgot to tell you that I already have a sweetheart. He's handsome and his martial arts are not bad. He's in Lu Mang. I'll introduce him to you next time." I have a sweetheart." Li Yi looked at her with his eyes wide open. His soul seemed to be hit by a speeding carriage. There was a slight tremble in his voice. Mississippi Lu nodded and said, "You and my sister don't need to worry. We'll get married when it's time." She stood up and said, "I still have something to do in the league. I'll leave first." Li Yi stood up and took her small bowl. He said in a daze, "Don't you want another bowl?" "No." Mississippi Lu waved her hand and said, "The porridge you cooked this time was too sweet. Remember to put less sugar next time." Then, she turned around and left. Her figure disappeared out of the door. Li Yi held the empty bowl in his hand. His mind was blank. What Mississippi Lu had just said exploded in his mind like thunder. She had a sweetheart, she still wanted to get married. Did she ask for Rui's opinion? Did she ask for his opinion? Men nowadays couldn't be judged on the surface. There were a lot of sanctimonious beasts. What if she met a bad guy? She actually complained that the porridge he cooked was too sweet. She clearly liked eating sweet things. When did she stop liking sweet things? Li Yi held the empty bowl and stood there in a daze. Outside the door, Mississippi Lu looked back. She turned back and the corner of her mouth curled up into an imperceptible smile. "Second Miss, good morning." Fong walked over from the side and waved his hand to greet her. "Morning." Mississippi Lu smiled at him and turned to leave. Fong's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. The expression on his face immediately froze. He looked at the sun above his head. There was no doubt that it rose from the east. Since the sun did not rise from the west, why did Second Miss smile at him? Could it be that Second Miss also thought that the new clothes he wore today matched him very well? After a long time, he shook his head and walked into the courtyard. Seeing Li Yi standing in the courtyard, Fong walked over happily and asked, "Son-in-law, look at the clothes I'm wearing today. Don't I look very spirited?" Crash! The small bowl in Li Yi's hand fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Fong looked at him in disbelief. Although he knew that the new clothes that Xiao Hong made for him looked very good on him, the son-in-law did not have to be so surprised, right? Li Yi picked up the broken pieces on the ground. Fong hurriedly said, "Son-in-law, these things can be done by the servants. Be careful not to cut yourself." The broken pieces in Li Yi's hand fell to the ground again. "I'll go get the medicinal wine." He looked at Li Yi's finger that was starting to bleed. He closed his mouth and turned to walk to the study. In a room in the inner courtyard, Xiao Huan changed the bed sheets on Second Miss's bed and put a new one on it. She picked up the pillow and patted it, but found a thin book under the pillow. Chapter 1039. The young maidservant was curious. The second young miss used to hate studying even more than she did. In the academy, she would often make old Sir Qin so angry that he couldn't breathe for a long time. Later on, old Sir Qin simply didn't let her go. But in the past 2 years, or more accurately, after the Lantern Festival 3 years ago, the second young miss seemed to be possessed. Many times, she spent more time reading books than practicing martial arts. She and the second young miss learned how to read from the son-in-law. Now, she could recognize quite a few words. She shook her head and put the book back, but for some reason, she looked at it again. With just one look, she froze on the spot and opened her mouth in surprise. She already knew quite a few words, so she naturally knew what was written on the page. Mandarin duck handkerchief. She remembered that when she learned the words, Mandarin duck, it took her a long time to remember it. She knew this book. She didn't know many books and couldn't even recite all 4 books and 5 classics, but she was very clear about the contents of this book. When the maidservants in the residence gossiped in private, they often mentioned this book. The title of the book was Mandarin Duck Handkerchief, but the contents had nothing to do with Mandarin ducks or handkerchiefs. This was a book that taught women how to pursue men. The book detailed the methods and steps for a woman to pursue her sweetheart, as well as how to test if a man liked her and if he was worthy of her liking, for example, the method of loosening the reins in order to advance. When the maidservant said these things, she didn't really understand them. But when the maidservant said these things, she didn't really understand them. Instead, she said, to make a man remember you, you must first make him feel pain. To make him remember you forever, you must make him feel pain deep in his heart. You can like a person's talent, his looks, or even his money. But if you like a person because he treats you well, then when he doesn't treat you well, you will have nothing. She understood 70 to 80% of these easy-to-understand words. This book had been banned by the government more than 10 years ago. The reason was that many people believed that this book was obscene and harmful to etiquette, so it was impossible to buy it on the market. However, many women would still keep a copy and keep it under their bed pillows. They would then pass it on to their close friends and treat the words in this book as priceless advice. It was said that the author of this book was an extraordinary woman. Because of her own experiences, she wrote this book to warn and teach all women in the world how to pursue the love of their lives and how to protect themselves. It was also said that the author of this book was a favored concubine deep in the palace. It was only because she had long seen through the love between men and women that she wrote this masterpiece. It didn't matter who the author of this book was. What mattered was Second Miss. Why did Second Miss read this kind of book? She flipped open the book and found that some notes had been made. She looked at the place where the notes were made and felt even more surprised. Who did the Second Miss like, and who did the Second Miss want to test? Li Yi's hand was only scratched by a broken piece of porcelain. The wound wasn't deep. After a simple cleaning and disinfecting, he didn't bandage it. Fong sat opposite him and looked at him with a burning gaze. He asked, "Son-in-law, do you have something on your mind?" Li Yi was silent for a moment. He looked at him and asked, "Have you been to the Lu Meng often recently?" "Quite often." Fong nodded. He was bullied by his own wife and couldn't fight back. He felt wronged and had to find a place to vent. "How is the Lu Meng recently? Did anything strange happen?" Fong thought for a moment and said, "Everything is fine. Nothing strange happened. It's just that a group of people passed the assessment some time ago. There are a few good seedlings among them. They look like humans, but I don't know if they are just embroidered pillows." Everyone whom old Fong described as a human or a dog was better looking than him. Fong actually wasn't ugly. Other than his body being a bit strong and his face being a bit naive, he was quite good looking. But that wasn't the main point. He looked at Fong and asked, "Do you feel that Rui has been acting strange recently?" Second Miss. Fong thought for a moment and thought of the strange smile she had shown at the door. He nodded and said, "Yes." Li Yi was silent for a moment and said, "Come with me to the Lu Meng. The number of core disciples in the Lu Meng has just exceeded 3,000. The number of masters on the 3 lists is also increasing every month. At this rate, it won't be difficult to reach 4,000 by the end of the year." The Lu Meng was located outside the county. It occupied a large area and was equivalent to a small town. Lu Luo walked beside him and introduced the recent developments of the Lu Meng. The Lu Meng had Su in charge and many masters on the heaven list. It was a great attraction for people in the martial arts world. The disciples who had passed through many rounds of selection were the best of the best. After Lu Luo finished introducing the recent developments in the Lu Meng, he pointed to a room in front and said, "The League Master is there. I will take you there." He pointed to the room. A woman put a letter on the table and said, "League Master, the situation in the Wu Kingdom is the same as before. The court and the rebel armies are still in a stalemate. There is no news of Princess Duanrong." The woman wore a tight white robe and was dressed like a man. Her hair was tied up in a bun similar to a man's. She had a valiant air about her. As the leader of the female army directly under the League Master, her strength was top and she was ranked in the top 10 of the heaven list. Although she was a woman, no one in the entire Lu Meng dared to look at her as a woman. "I understand, you," Mississippi Lu nodded. Suddenly, her eyebrows moved. She took the initiative to hold the woman's hand and said, "You have worked hard. I know that you have admired Jiang of Silla for a long time and have wanted to meet him for a long time. Coincidentally, you have encountered a bottleneck in your martial arts. Come back with me today and meet Jiang of Silla. At the same time, you can get some pointers from my sister." The woman looked down at their hands that were held together, and her face suddenly blushed. Somewhere in the Lu Meng, Fong looked in surprise at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, why aren't you going to find second young mistress? Li Yi shook his head and said, I suddenly remembered that second madam's fish is still being steamed in the pot. If it is steamed for too long, it will not be tender anymore. We have to go back quickly. Inside the room, the woman looked down at the hand Mississippi Lu was holding her hand. Her face was red and she said in a low voice, League Master, I know, the woman was stunned. You know. Then, she lowered her head and her face became even redder. She said in a low voice, I know that we are both women, and women should not like other women, but, I know that you have long wanted to meet my sister and Jiang of Silla. Rui was stunned. He looked at her and asked, what did you just say? Jiang of Silla Mansion. Li Yi was cooking in the small kitchen. Fong leaned against the door and looked at him worriedly. At a certain moment, he suddenly said, son-in-law. Li Yi turned around and glanced at him, his face expressionless. Does it hurt? Fong asked. What hurts? Where else does it hurt, son-in-law? It hurts. Your hand doesn't hurt. Why does it hurt? Because you cut your hand just now. Fong finally understood. It was not the second young mistress who was strange, but the son-in-law. The son-in-law had been distracted for the whole day. He was cut by broken porcelain in the morning and cut his hand while cutting vegetables in the afternoon. This was something that would not happen even if he closed his eyes. What's wrong with your hand? At a certain moment, Mississippi Lu walked into the kitchen and looked at his bandaged hand. She frowned and asked. She looked up and saw that his eyes were confused and his expression was blank. Li Yi shook his head and said, It's nothing. I accidentally cut it. Mississippi Lu took a step forward. How could you be so careless? Let me see, it's a small injury. Li Yi took 2 steps back and asked, Is someone here? Who? Your sweetheart. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and a strange look flashed in her eyes again. She said, I was just joking with you this morning. How can I have a sweetheart? Joking? Li Yi looked at her in grief and indignation. He walked to the yard and pointed at the gigolo standing in the yard. He said, I saw you holding hands today. Don't tell me that was also a joke. You misunderstood. Mississippi Lu looked at him and explained, She's a woman. Misunderstood. Woman. Li Yi was even more indignant. Although I'm stupid, I'm not blind. Not only was he indignant, but he was also very disappointed. Did she think that he couldn't even tell the difference between a man and a woman? Was she so perfunctory now? He patted the gigolo's chest and said, You said he's a woman. Where are her breasts? Where are her breasts? The face of the gigolo, who was patted by Li Yi, turned from red to white and then to green. Mississippi Lu did not answer him. She thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, Can you beat the 9th on the heaven list? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.